Chapter 292. Outer Ring, Byron Family's Encampment. In a small secret room far away from the banquet hall, the goblin cabbie was fiddling with something with a fervent expression. In front of him, a simple magical machine propped up a white screen. The self-proclaimed great inventor, engineer, and planer merchant of the Goblin Empire, Duke Gaz-Lu, was wearing a high magnification monocle, his saliva flying everywhere as he roared. No, absolutely not. Gaz-Lu waved his green arm that was covered in thick hair. Anything less than 17 magic crystals is out of the question. I won't let a vampire like you take advantage of me. We've known each other for so long, but you've never obtained anything of value. You can't be a qualified plainer merchant like this. You're only fit to be a depraved goblin who picks through rubbish. The other party's sarcasm had evidently provoked the goblin cabbie. Any words that insulted his dream of being a plainer merchant would incur his wrath. You coward who only knows how to hide behind a screen. The teleportation device you gave me is a piece of junk. It can only teleport items that weigh less than 500 grams, and there will definitely be a teleportation error every 3 to 4 times. Who the hell knows which corner of the multiverse this broken machine of yours has randomly thrown the treasures I've teleported to? Do I have to bear the losses caused by your device? Bastard, you uncultured goblin. You don't understand how terrifying the energy required to teleport between 2 different planes is. You don't have an energy furnace, you don't have a reaction pool, you don't have an energy room. A lowly goblin like you doesn't have anything. You want to rely on some low-grade energy crystals to obtain a large and stable spatial passageway? Not to mention the fact that the Goblin Empire doesn't have such technology, even the magi behind you can't do this. Then what should I do? You're always making a ruckus, using an unreliable teleportation device to start trading. Who's going to bear the losses caused? If you can get me some useful magi items or special energy treasures, I can bear the losses caused by spatial destruction and spatial turbulence. Humph, don't think that I'm easy to fool just because I don't know anything. This device of yours is too unreliable. It's not suitable for large-scale transactions between planes. All transactions are basically one-off. Once you get the sample and analyze it successfully, you won't need to continue the transaction. I've spent so much effort to gather resources for you, but I've only gotten so little in return. I won't do such a stupid thing again. Ugh! On the light screen, Gaz-Lurvy pushed up his spectacles and sized up the little goblin in front of him. Who would have thought that a little gnome who lived under the thrall of a terrifying wizard and had no knowledge of science and technology would be able to understand such complicated logic? He couldn't help but look at Cabbie in a new light. All right, little Kirby. Since we both need the things in each other's hands, we should show some sincerity. I can raise the price appropriately, and you have to take out something really useful. Gazruvi's wrinkled green face was full of sincerity. Is my existence valuable to you and the goblins? Cabbie asked doubtfully. Of course. Gaz-Lurvy pushed up his spectacles again. You have to know that you're now in the Magus world, a large plane famous in the multiverse. It's many times larger than the plane our Goblin Empire is in. If I accidentally throw the teleportation device into spatial turbulence, it can drift through space and appear in any corner of the multiverse. If you want me to open up a new path to the Magus world, the Goblin Empire can't do it with its strength, and it won't be able to do it. After all, the legends say that magi are very terrifying and invasive creatures. You mean to say that we can only rely on this broken device to transact? Yes. Is there anything I need to pay attention to when using this teleportation device? Firstly, for the teleportation device to work stably, it's best if you can find a powerful energy source for it. Such as? Such as an energy pool. Do you think a little gnome like me can come into contact with an energy pool in a Magus tower? Next, a natural elemental gathering place, such as the core of a large storm, an underground volcano. Do you have any sincerity? With my strength, wouldn't I just be courting death if I went to those places? Or some high-grade energy crystals, at least 10 times more powerful than the magic crystals you're using now. Only then will the teleportation device be able to work stably. High-grade energy crystals? What's that? Can you be more specific? Cabby muttered as he rummaged through his waist pouch in frustration. Later, he felt that it was too troublesome to rummage through, so he simply poured out all the things in his waist pouch, letting them cover the entire table. Wait! Gaz Lurvy's urgent voice suddenly came from the light screen. What is that silver-white metal object? Cabby followed Gaz Lurvy's instructions and took out a heavy metal ball from the messy pile of items. This was a metal ball that looked like it was carved out of silver, but it did not have the softness of silver when touched. The surface of the ball was uneven, and there were strange patterns and grooves everywhere. Although he could not sense any energy aura from it, it was still a genuine mechanical heart. Mechanical heart was an alchemical heart created by a puppet master for a high-grade magic puppet or golem. It was the core component of a witchcraft puppet. It could be said that the reason a puppet knight could have such powerful combat power was not only because of the hard shells of countless rare resources, but also because of the existence of the mechanical heart, which could bring this cold, hard metal creature to life. When the puppet master Runo fused the soul of a grade 2 knight into it, the mechanical heart's ability grew by leaps and bounds. As long as it was given a complete metal body, it could bring it back to life and become a powerful metal puppet. Of course, such a powerful mechanical heart did not belong to the goblin Cabby. It was a spoil of war obtained by its owner Grim. After thoroughly analyzing its secrets, Grim thought about whether he should keep this mechanical heart and create an indestructible iron guard for himself. Unfortunately, he could not find any information about the puppet amulet. Without the puppet amulet, it meant that if he really wanted to create a giant iron guard, Grim could only be like those low-grade arcane sorcerers, running around the world with an indomitable iron lump. Magic puppets were quite powerful, but the fact that they were not easy to carry around was enough to sentence them to death. In the future, when Grim had his own base or wizard tower, it would be a good idea to leave this thing at home to guard the door. But now, it was better to bring a few high-grade magic puppets with him. Therefore Grim, who planned to exchange it for some high-grade elemental crystal cores, threw it to Cabby. Cabby was determined to become a goblin merchant anyway, so it was suitable for him to do this kind of thing. At this moment, Cabby held the mechanical heart in his hand and looked at the light screen doubtfully. "This mechanical heart is useful to you?" "Of course it's useful. If I'm not wrong, it should be a magical mechanical control core obtained by sorcerers through witchcraft, and it's the kind with super high intelligence. Our Goblin Empire walks the path of magical machinery. Although we can create a similar magical mechanical core, we have never found a way to integrate life and souls into it. So it can be sold for a high price." Cabby smiled sinisterly as he lightly tossed the metal ball in the air. Gaz Lurvy was silent. "Tell me, be straightforward. How much are you willing to pay for this mechanical heart? Don't try to deceive me with those inferior things like rocket boots and parachutes. Also, this mechanical heart is seriously overloaded. Are you sure it can be sent through your teleportation device?" After a long silence, Gaz Lurvy seemed to have finally understood, and a flattering smile appeared on his greasy green face. "Dear Cabby, I hereby solemnly recommend to you the greatest war machine of the Goblin Empire, the magical mechanical armor. With it, you will no longer have to fear your enemies. It will become your most loyal and powerful warrior, destroying all enemies that appear in its line of sight." "Oh, you mean those terrifying metal men that are as large as hills? I'm not going to set up a construction team. You're giving me this variant of the logging robot, but what can I do with it? I'm afraid that just gathering the metal and spare parts required to build it will take me over 100 years. Does that mean anything to me?" Cabby's intelligence was clearly off the charts today, and he was no longer the little goblin that could be easily deceived in the past. He roared angrily at the screen. "Don't be angry, dear Cabby. Then let me recommend you a super terrifying offensive weapon, the magical cannon. With it, you will be invincible. No enemy will be able to defend against its terrifying attack. No way, no way. I'm a peace-loving goblin merchant. You should sell those fighting and killing things to others. I only need some high-grade elemental crystal cores. These are things that Master personally ordered us to collect, and the more the better." All right. Elemental crystal cores it is. How much do you intend to pay for the trade? The manufacturing method of the magical reaver and the finished product of the demonic cannon, along with 100 grade 2 elemental crystal cores and above. Bullshit. Gaz Ruvi immediately jumped 3 feet high. Why don't you just rob someone? Your mechanical heart isn't worth that price. Then how much can you offer? Gaz Ruvi immediately extended 3 fingers, but after some hesitation, he gritted his teeth and extended 4 grade 2 elemental crystal cores. That's all I can get. Bullshit. It was now Cabby's turn to jump 3 feet high. This is robbery. This is outright robbery. You're the greediest, most shameless, and stingiest goblin I've ever seen. This price is robbery. The 2 goblins of the same race were obviously stingy and wretched to the core, but they were also greedy and shameless. Hence, separated by a dense screen, the 2 would point at the sky and curse at each other from time to time. But after a while, the 2 would gather together and start haggling. Chapter 293. Sky City, Inner Ring Main Control Hall. This was a huge palace built in the middle of the mountain, covering an area of nearly 10,000 square meters. However, such a description was not accurate. To be precise, it should be that this huge and magnificent mysterious palace was built first. In order to conceal its existence, the Silver Alliance put on a layer of mountain shell. Most of the buildings in the inner ring were added later, and the purpose of their existence was to study and protect the mysterious palace in the middle of the mountain. If one had the opportunity to become a sorcerer of the Silver Alliance, put on a silver robe, and gloriously become a member of the ruling parliament, then one would be qualified to step into this mysterious palace, study and understand the ultimate secret of the arcane sorcerers. Stepping into this place, one would be surprised to find that it was simply a sea of runic machinery. There was a huge space inside the mysterious palace, and in this space, there were trillions of gears, shafts, springs, levers and other indescribable metal parts and components floating. They were of different sizes, more or less, and their shapes and forms were not exactly the same. The only thing they had in common was that every part and component was silver white, and they were all engraved with a strange golden rune. These metal parts, the big ones were as big as an island, and the small ones could only be seen with the help of the highest magnifying glass. They seemed to be floating in the void in a messy and disorderly manner, but if someone could take a panoramic view of the entire mysterious space, they would be surprised to find that everything had a pattern. In the entire mysterious space, the trillions of runic machinery were completely operating according to some powerful rule power. Mechanical parts and metal components of different sizes were randomly floating inside. Once 2 different parts collided together, they would randomly assemble into a new part. Once the number of parts increased, a strange runic rune would appear in the mysterious space. No one could understand what this rune was. Perhaps it was a part of a clock mechanism, or perhaps it was a part of a powerful runic puppet, or perhaps it was just a bunch of meaningless gears. Of course, it was even more possible that it was the prototype of a mysterious machine that no one had ever seen before. Unfortunately, such a composite mechanical structure could not exist for too long. Very quickly, the runic machinery that had just been pieced together would once again split into countless basic components in a new collision. But the strange thing was that these newly disassembled parts were obviously different from the parts before they were assembled. Thus, trillions of silver parts floated in the void of the mysterious palace, assembling and disintegrating repeatedly. But no matter how they reorganized and decomposed, they were always confined to that empty space and would not flow out. It was as if there was a transparent boundary there. This was the core of the Sky Castle, the mechanical realm. Today was still the most ordinary day in the mechanical secret realm. A dozen magi in silver robes with silver badges on their chests shuttled through the sea of rune machines under the protection of a silver glow. They were all members of the Silver Alliance's parliament, and possessed extremely high status and authority that others envied. But here they were just a group of diligent gardeners and porters. In this mysterious space, any life form that did not have the protection of an esoteric amulet would find it hard to survive. They would either be crushed into meat paste by the densely packed gears and bearings, or be vaporized by the sudden disintegration of the runic machinery's energy storm. The entire Sky City was like a huge energy concentrator. Every day, a large amount of magic energy would be gathered and poured into this mysterious space, providing it with an endless supply of powerful energy. What this mysterious space gave them in return were powerful runic machines that possessed great power. Every day, a few silver-robed magi would enter the mysterious space and unfold a runic puppet scroll that was the result of countless arcane magi's painstaking efforts. Amidst the endless sea of runic machines, there were layers upon layers. When the silver light engulfed the surroundings, countless gears, bearings, grinding wheels, transmission rods, springs, pipes, and many other strange parts that could not be named floated above the scroll like bees attracted by the fragrance of flowers. They began to assemble themselves according to the power of laws engraved in the scroll. There was no need for any external intervention at all. With just a puppet scroll that had perfect laws and a self-consistent system, an exquisitely designed and powerful silver runic puppet was automatically assembled. Under the control of the power of laws, the moment the silver runic puppet was completed, it possessed extremely high battle intelligence. It began to demonstrate various difficult battle moves according to the runic spell formation that was etched in its body. If there was no conflict between the power of laws and the puppet scroll, the silver runic puppet could be maintained indefinitely. However, if there was even the slightest conflict between laws, the silver runic puppet would suddenly disintegrate during operation, and then revert back to its original parts and components. The silver-robed magi were responsible for recording the entire process of the silver runic puppet's assembly to its disintegration, so that the arcane magi could continue to correct and improve the mistakes in the scroll. Relying on this method, the arcane magi could continuously try and make mistakes, and continuously improve until the silver runic puppet's combat power met their requirements. Only then would it be finalized. This way, they could directly deliver the final model to the puppet factory for mass production, thus avoiding the large amount of waste and long trial and error processes in the early stages of puppet development. Of course, although they had the assistance of the mechanical secret realm, which allowed them to save a lot of resources and time, how could a mature and powerful runic puppet design be so easily completed? There were tens of thousands of arcane magi in Sky City, but less than a tenth of them had the qualifications to wear a silver robe, and only 1,000th of them had the qualifications to become a member of the council. In the end, there were less than 10 who could come into contact with the mechanical secret realm and list it as a research project. And all of them had the title of council elder, and in the whole of Sky City, and even the whole area ruled by the Silver Alliance, they had great power and influence. Therefore, according to the different levels of authority within the Silver Alliance, some people divided the Alliance members into 5 ranks. The lowest rank was, of course, the ordinary silver-robed magi who had the status of arcane magi, rank 1. They were the foundation of the Silver Alliance, and also had some privileges in Sky City. Above the silver-robed magi were the silver-robed enforcers, rank 2. They were slightly more powerful arcane magi, and were mainly responsible for the normal operation and security of Sky City. They had the authority to mobilize part of the Sky Guards. The silver-robed enforcer's headquarters was located in the bird's nest above Sky City, which was also the station of the Sky Guards. If ordinary silver-robed magi were like commoners, then the silver-robed enforcers were like police officers. The Sky Guards were a legion of runic puppets controlled by the silver-robed enforcers. Above the silver-robed enforcers were the silver-robed counselors, rank 3. They were usually taken up by arcane masters, and were also the core members who controlled and promoted the development of the Silver Alliance. Most of the Silver Alliance's daily affairs were decided and executed by them, and their main place of activity was the Alliance's Council Hall in the central area. Above the silver-robed counselors were the chairman of the council and the elders, rank 4. Currently, the Silver Alliance had a chairman and a deputy chairman, as well as 7 elders. These 9 people were the core combat power of the entire Silver Alliance, and were also the guarantee of the Silver Alliance's strength as one of the 3 major sorcerer organizations in the Sorcerer Continent. It was precisely because of their existence that the Silver Alliance could continue for tens of thousands of years without declining. At any time, the Silver Alliance would always have at least 9 rank 4 arcane magi. Even if they died due to factors such as the end of their lifespan or accidental deaths, they would find ways to replenish the number of members in a short period of time. Therefore, the 9 rank 4 magi would always be the Silver Alliance's top combat power on the surface. As for whether they were hiding part of their strength in private, it was always a mystery to outsiders. Due to being buried in the witchcraft laboratory all year round, the arcane magi usually came into contact with powerful and loyal witchcraft puppets. Therefore, they developed the habit of worshipping rules and order. Therefore, when sorcerers from the outside came to Sky City, they mostly evaluated the Silver Alliance as dreamy, powerful, and inflexible. Since the Silver Alliance had gathered nearly 60 to 70% of the arcane magi in the Sorcerer Continent, Sky City had become a large stage where all kinds of witchcraft puppets gathered. Up until now, the Silver Alliance had amassed a large number of powerful witchcraft puppets. This had become the thing that sorcerers from all regions of the Sorcerer Continent were most curious about. Although the Silver Alliance sold quite a number of witchcraft puppets every year to supply the various sorcerer families in their expeditions, they kept even more. No one knew how many witchcraft puppets the Silver Alliance had secretly hidden, but everyone knew that it was definitely an extremely large number. However, at this moment, an abnormal alarm suddenly sounded in a space management committee under the silver-robed enforcer's headquarters in the central area of Sky City. Warning, warning. Abnormal spatial fluctuations detected. Initial determination is that it's a small alien wormhole. Target area being locked. Target area has been locked. The source of the spatial fluctuations is at 167 Champs-Élysées Street in the 12th district of the Outer Circle. Verified to belong to the Byron Magus family in the Terran Dagon area. Chapter 294. Someone had woken Grimm up from his sleep. The sound of someone banging on the door could be heard clearly, and even a simple defensive spell could not completely block it. When he removed the barrier and opened the door, he was immediately shocked by the scene outside. The area where the Byron family resided in had shops on the side facing the street, while the inner side had become the family's encampment and warehouse. However, at this moment, the sky above the family's encampment was covered by a huge black shadow. An airship that resembled a giant whale was hovering above the Byron family's encampment, and tall figures leapt down from it with whistling sounds. Their heavy bodies smashed deep holes into the stone slabs on the ground. Then, amidst the grinding sounds of mechanical gears, 4-meter-tall ferocious metal puppets crawled out of the deep holes, the magic gems embedded in their metal eye sockets emitting a dazzling and terrifying red light. Among them, there were humanoid metal puppets, spider-shaped metal puppets, and some huge round constructs that could float near the ground, with more than a dozen strange metal tentacles coming out of them. Sky Guard Squad 935 has been ordered to take over this area. No one is allowed to enter or leave as they please. Stay where you are and wait for the silver-robed enforcers to investigate. Anyone who disobeys will be killed immediately. The metal puppets shouted in their unique mechanical voice as they moved quickly blocking all the entrances and important areas of the Byron family's encampment. When the 29 rank 1 metal puppets had occupied all the advantageous terrain, an even more ferocious and terrifying war golem descended on a floating disc. This was a terrifying war golem that was 10 meters tall. It had a humanoid body, and its torso was densely covered in colorful patterns. Every movement it made had a suffocating and terrifying aura. In its hand was a huge and exaggerated metal battle axe, the huge axe's surface enough to be used as a gate to any city. The war golem wielded the huge battle axe, every step it took causing the ground to shake. If such a huge thing went crazy, it would probably take less than a quarter of an hour to destroy the entire encampment. As a top-notch magus of the Byron family stationed in Sky City, Magus Nunnally had already appeared at the scene of the incident. Unfortunately, her identity as a rank 2 magus was not enough to scare anyone here. The indomitable war golem had the terrifying strength of no less than grade 2. Considering that this was the headquarters of the Silver Alliance, the war golems and construction puppets belonging to the Sky Guards would receive a great deal of support from spells within the vicinity of Sky City. Therefore, if they were to fight, it would not be easy for a Tier 2 elemental sorcerer to defeat this big fellow of the same rank. Moreover, if someone dared to attack the Sky Guards, it would be like poking a giant hornet's nest. In less than a quarter of an hour, the densely packed fortresses in the sky would descend. At that time, this small family base would be engulfed by a tide of terrifying magic marionettes. Therefore, Nunnally floated in front of the giant war golem and loudly protested against its reckless intrusion, but she didn't dare to take the initiative to chase them away. Please wait patiently. A silver-robed enforcer will come and explain the situation to you soon. Until then, please ask your men to stop all suspicious activities. In response to the Tier 2 sorcerer's protest, the war golem threw out a sentence and ignored him. The bionic ruby compound eyes inlaid on its head shot out concentrated red rays, scanning everything in the encampment in detail without missing a single detail. However, when the war golem turned its head in a certain direction, the ruby compound eyes that flickered rhythmically seemed to have discovered some signs and flickered even more frequently. The wide range of red rays from before quickly concentrated on a room next to Grimm's. Grimm stood at the door of his residence. When he saw the war golem's detection rays focused on Cabby's room, his heart immediately turned upside down. This damned Cabby, what was it up to this time? Even the famous Sky Guards have been provoked. Don't blame me for not stopping you if you're courting death. Grimm cursed inwardly as he silently used the slave contract between him and Cabby to call out to him. Since they were very close to each other and Cabby's room was not isolated by a defensive spell, Grimm could easily contact him. Damned goblin, what have you done this time? Don't you know that you've provoked the guards of Sky Castle? Tell me, what have you done? Grimm cursed impatiently as soon as the two's minds connected. Master, Cabby shivered as he replied, I used that mechanical heart to exchange for some good stuff with a fellow from the Goblin Empire in another plane. I was just about to report to you. Report my ass. Don't be so happy yet. Think about how to get rid of the Sky Guards who have come to our door first. Grimm reprimanded. By the way, how did you keep in contact with each other? Master, it's like this. At this point, Cabby didn't dare to hide anything anymore. He told him everything about the connection between him and Gaz Lurvy. After listening to his description, Grimm immediately fell into deep thought. What should I do? Hand Cabby over? If he handed Cabby over, then the connection between him and the Goblin Empire would end. If any large organization obtained that teleportation device, they would be able to make a big deal out of it. A goblin plane? That meant a secondary plane that could be taken away at will. Endless metal mines, a large number of qualified slaves who were adept at manufacturing machines, countless unknown resources. Any one of these was enough for a Magus family to rise to power. It would be a pity if he let it slip from his hands like this. However, if he did not hand over Cabby and the teleportation device, how was he going to explain the teleportation just now? Grimm's thoughts raced, and he quickly made up his mind. At this moment, the space above the encampment trembled slightly. A stable teleportation door slowly opened, and 3 silver-robed enforcers walked out with their heads held high. Lady Nunnally, very good. With you here, today's matter will definitely be resolved perfectly. The leading silver-robed enforcer wore a silver metal headband on his forehead. It was densely engraved with hollowed-out runes, and he was obviously acquainted with Magus Nunnally. The 3 silver-robed enforcers were all Grade 1 Magi. Logically speaking, in the Magus world where strength was everything, they could only hide in a corner and deal with Nunnally, who had the strength of a Grade 2 Magus. However, here in the Silver Alliance's territory, even a Tier 2 Magus like Nunnally couldn't act as haughtily as before. On the contrary, she had to negotiate politely with these uninvited guests on equal footing. So it's Sir Randolph. May I know why you've come to my family's encampment? Magus Nunnally was a familiar face who had hung around in Sky City for many years, and her strength was obvious. Without sufficient reason, these silver-robed enforcers were not willing to offend a Grade 2 Magus for no reason. Lady Nunnally, you might not know, but we've just detected the appearance of a wormhole in your family's encampment. So, Randolph explained with a smile that did not reach his eyes. What did you say? Is it a spatial teleportation or a wormhole? Nunnally frowned, as if she could not believe her ears. If it was a spatial teleportation, it meant that there was a small teleportation spell formation hidden in the encampment, used for long-distance teleportation within a plane. This was forbidden by the Sky Council. However, if it was a wormhole, it meant that someone had broken through the Magus world's barrier and was trying to connect to another plane. Although many Magus families were doing this, they would place the communication point in their own family's Magus tower in order to prevent outsiders from detecting the spatial anomaly. Who would be foolish enough to go to Sky City to connect to another plane? Although the Magus world did not fear the invasion of another plane, doing this in the heart of the Silver Alliance was still a little too rash. Just as Nunnally was confused, Grimm shouted awkwardly, "Lady Nunnally, this might be a misunderstanding." Everyone's gaze immediately focused on Grimm. Misunderstanding? What kind of misunderstanding? Randolph narrowed his eyes and could not help but sneer. Lady Nunnally, this person looks unfamiliar. Is he also a new Magus in your family? It had to be said that Grimm's strength was still too shallow. Anyone could tell that he was a new Magus, and he would not be valued by others. He was invited by our family from the Scattered Towers to participate in the arcane competition. His name is Grimm, and he has a powerful elemental puppet under him. Wizard Nunnally explained briefly, and could not help but lower her head and frown. Grimm, what do you mean by misunderstanding? If you are here because of the spatial anomaly just now, then I must admit that it was caused by me. Then I have to admit that I caused it. Grimm's reply was resolute and decisive. A new Magus like you can open a wormhole and connect to another plane? Randolph raised his head and was about to laugh out loud to mock Grimm, but when he saw something Grimm took out from his pocket, he suddenly froze and could not help but blurt out. Chapter 295. What was the Void Stone? Most wizards might not even get to see the Void Stone's true appearance in their entire lives. When the relevant books introduced the Void Stone, they simply described it as the core material for building a long-distance teleportation formation. This description was not wrong, but it was not accurate. Even without the Void Stone, it was possible to build a long-distance teleportation formation, but it would require a wizard tower to be the space-time beacon for the teleportation, and every teleportation would consume a large amount of magical crystals. This meant a large amount of money and resources, as well as a long construction period. If the construction of a long-distance teleportation formation was used in peacetime, this speed and expenditure could be considered acceptable. But if it was used in a dimensional war where every second mattered, this speed was too slow. In a bloody and cruel dimensional war, the earlier the teleportation formation was built, the more troops that could be sent over, the greater the possibility of changing the outcome of the dimensional war. If the speed of the teleportation was too slow, the stronghold built by the wizards in the early stages would be swallowed up by the local aborigines with their advantage in numbers, and all the previous investments would be for naught. What was more terrifying was that the wizards used by the family for battles would be lost in other dimensions. This was a huge blow that no wizard family could bear. Take the Solubo family for example. They had clearly won a dimensional war, but because they had lost too many wizards in the dimensional war, they were close to the lowest limit of the family's ability to maintain control over the various dimensions. That was why the family's power in the main plane was in turmoil. To put it bluntly, if not for the timely return of the main forces of the family like Corgan and Grimm, the Solubo family might have lost 30% of their power in the wizard continent before they could regain their footing. Even though these losses could be regained as the family thrived in the future, it was inevitable that they would be fatigued in the short term. At the start of the dimensional war, if the Solubo family had the Void Stone, they would not have needed to build the War Wizard Tower with so many people. They could find a desolate mountain and use the Void Stone to build a long-distance teleportation formation. That way, a large number of people and resources could be continuously transported into other dimensions. By the time the natives of the other dimensions realized that something was wrong and gathered a large army to rush over, they would no longer be facing a few magi. Instead, they would be facing an organized army of wizard beasts and a wizard battle squad that was ready for battle. Moreover, the long-distance teleportation arrays built with void stones could automatically absorb the spatial power in the void, thereby reducing the need for mana crystals. This way, the sorcerer families could save a lot of money. However, it was precisely because of the excellent quality of the Void Stone that it had become a strategic resource that sorcerer families with ambitions to conquer planes had to hoard. The appearance of any Void Stone would cause many sorcerer families to fight for it openly and covertly, so it rarely appeared in the circulation of various regions. Basically, as soon as they showed themselves, they would be snatched away by large families or organizations. Ordinary small families and sorcerers would not even have the chance to see them. Therefore, when the silver-robed enforcer Randolph blurted out the words Void Stone, the Byron family wizards gathered in the encampment couldn't help but tremble. They all looked at the fist-sized gray stone in Grimm's hand. This is the Void Stone? It's too inconspicuous. While everyone was still in shock, Grimm's right hand that was holding the gray stone shook slightly. Strange silver lines appeared on the trajectory of the gray stone, and the space around the gray stone began to slightly distort. All the sorcerers were shocked. Without the help of any spell, it could easily distort the void with its own characteristic. As expected of the famous Void Stone, after the initial shock, all the sorcerers' eyes were filled with greed and pity. Good stuff, it really is good stuff. Too bad it was shown in front of everyone. If only I knew about this. Wouldn't it be one female and two male silver-robed enforcers looked at each other and immediately made a decision. Wizard Randolph stepped up and yelled, "Mr. Grimm, since you've conducted an extremely dangerous space experiment in the Sky City without permission, I, representing the Space Committee, have decided to seal up your space experiment equipment for now. You can go to the Space Committee in 3 days to appeal, and the Union Parliament will make a fair decision. Now, you can hand over your experiment equipment." "Wait a minute," a voice suddenly interrupted Randolph's speech. Everyone looked towards the source of the voice. It was the red-robed Magus Nunnally. "Mr. Randolph, you have conducted dangerous experiments in Sky City without permission, and you need to be punished. However, if I remember correctly, as long as this experiment does not endanger the safety of Sky City and its members, you can be punished by paying a fine. Since Mr. Grimm is an important guest of our family, the Byron family is willing to pay for his fine." "You!" Randolph was so angry that his eyes widened. As a fair enforcer of Sky City, of course, he knew that Ms. Nunnally's rules were valid. If it was in the past, he would naturally be willing to do a favor for the sake of a Tier 2 sorcerer and make the matter small. But this involved a void stone. Looking at its size, it had far exceeded the standard amount needed to build an interplane teleportation circle. If he let something like this pass in front of him, he would probably be blamed by all the Union Parliament members when he returned. "Ms. Nunnally, what you said is the normal way to deal with this. What he's doing is extremely dangerous space experiments, so we can't use this method to replace it," Wizard Randolph explained in a serious tone. His voice was deep and full of power, showing his determination. Unfortunately, faced with a void stone that could bring great benefits to her family, Wizard Nunnally was obviously not willing to give it up easily. Of course, it was unwise to offend these silver-robed enforcers for no reason in Sky City, but if the price was a void stone, then it was not a bad idea. As long as the family behaved a little better in Sky City in the future, these guys who only followed the rules and laws would not be able to take away the Byron family's right. Things were very clear in front of them. Once this void stone fell into their hands, no one would believe such a ridiculous thing even if they repeatedly said that they could get it back by appealing to the Union Parliament. These guys with their rigid minds were not very good at fighting, but their ability to flip through the laws and use the Sky Code, word by word, was top-notch. Who knew what kind of laws they would find in that thick 3 meters tall Sky Code to swallow this void stone? Of course, forcefully taking it away would not happen. Those Union Parliament members would definitely redeem this void stone with a very attractive price. However, what kind of price could compare to a secondary plane that could be easily obtained? Seriously speaking, almost every old sorcerer family in the sorcerer continent would have a waymark that had yet to be conquered in their hands. The main reason why they had not conquered them yet was that the cost of resources and manpower to open up a plane war was too high. Every established Magus family needed a period of time to accumulate resources. Once their reserves reached the minimum required for a planar war, the family's magi would also have new blood. That was the best time to consider launching a planar expedition. The only reason why they did not dare to eat delicious food was because they were afraid of choking to death. However, if they had a void stone, they could sneak in and build a teleportation formation. Before the natives of the plane could react, a large number of family wizards and organized wizard guards would be able to enter the plane. With the terrifying methods of the wizards, would the secondary plane still have a chance to resist? He only needed to build a teleportation formation and a complete war wizard tower. The difference in difficulty would determine the outcome of a dimensional war. Therefore, in a situation where the silver-robed enforcer didn't have a hold on the family, it was necessary for Wizard Nunnally to fight for the Void Stone. This treasure was too important to her family. She had no choice but to fight for it. As the law enforcers of the Sky City, even though Randolph and the others were usually domineering, they could not forcefully take it away. Seeing that even the Sky Guards could not make Wizard Nunnally yield, Randolph had no choice but to announce that he would bring Grimm to the Union Parliament. It looked like the Union Parliament members would have to make a fair judgment on this matter. The Union Parliament was the highest authority in the Sky City. It had 97 Level 3 members. Most of them were high-level arcane wizards trained by the Silver Alliance themselves. However, they also hired some well-known Level 3 wizards who were not from the Silver Alliance. The Union Parliament Hall was the most important magic building in the entire Central Circle. The Silver Alliance ruled over a large area. All the human settlements in the southwest of the Wizard Continent were under its protection. There were a total of 15 regions and countries. The Silver Alliance had to send members to manage each region. To facilitate communication and trade, the Silver Alliance had stationed members in the scattered Forest of Towers, the Northern Witches, the Wizard Association, and other large regions. Hence, even though 97 Tier 3 counselors sounded like a lot, it was clearly not enough to make ends meet. Chapter 296. Your name is Grim, and you're from the Cerubo family of the scattered Terran region? A rat-headed counselor raised his head from the tall judge's stand. He adjusted the gold-rimmed spectacles on his nose and looked at Grim doubtfully. Yes, my lord. Grim tried his best to reply calmly. Otherwise, if anyone were to see a person who resembled a large rat wearing a silver robe, a flat hat, and a pair of gold-rimmed spectacles leisurely flipping through documents, their first reaction would be to throw their heads back and laugh out loud. However, Grim did not dare. He really did not dare. Although Grim's appearance was laughable, he was still a Grade 3 Magus. After all, Grim was a criminal waiting to be judged, and any disrespectful behavior would bring him unpredictable punishment. While you were in Sky City, you violated the spatial regulations here. You did not apply in advance and opened a small spatial wormhole without permission. This action would pose a certain degree of threat to the safety of Sky City. Do you admit to this? Ratman Councilman Pyro slowly read through the documents handed to him by the silver-robed enforcer Randolph, repeating Grim's crimes word by word. My lord, I do not deny that I violated the regulations and conducted spatial experiments without permission. However, I do not agree with the accusation that the spatial experiments will affect the safety of Sky City. Grim had the urge to laugh out loud as he faced the court of justice in this foreign world. However, this matter was related to his personal interests, so he could only endure it and deal with the other party with reason and evidence. Do you have anything to add to Sir Grim's answer? Pyro asked the silver-robed enforcer Randolph. My lord, the Spatial Committee acts according to the rules of Sky City. The defensive mechanism of Sky City has detected the spatial wormhole and estimated the intensity of the wormhole to be XXX. The wormhole has a radius of 1 meter, and it connects to a low-magic secondary material plane. The location of the connection is between star sector 0713 and star sector 0941. Since it's an unknown, distant region, rashly connecting to it will cause Sky City to face the possibility of contamination. That's why the three of us agreed that His Excellency Grim should be severely punished for his recklessness. The silver-robed enforcer Randolph's reply was sonorous and forceful, but Grim rolled his eyes. You can already detect that the opposite side of the wormhole is a low-magic secondary plane, and you're still worried about it invading the sorcerer's world? This was simply sophistry. However, in order to not expose Cabby's teleportation device, Grim could only shake his head and play along with Randolph's act. Sir, I think Mr. Randolph's conclusion is too arbitrary, and he doesn't have any direct evidence to support his conclusion. Grim still wanted to defend himself, but the Ratman Councilman Pyro interrupted him by knocking the wooden hammer. Sir, I think Mr. Randolph's conclusion is too arbitrary. Your Excellency Nunnally, we're discussing Grim's mistake of opening a wormhole without permission. Why are you here? Ratfolk Councilman Pyro turned his head to look at Nunnally. Sir, this Sir Grim is a guest invited by the Byron family. He has just won a arcane competition for us. As he came in a hurry, we didn't have the time to explain the rules here to him, and that's why he made such a mistake. I hope the Alliance Council can take this into consideration and punish him leniently. The Byron family is willing to pay for his punishment. Nunnally obviously did not want to give up on the Void Stone so easily. But it's a Void Stone. Although the Ratfolk Councilman Pyro looked like an old pedant, he was not a stubborn old man. At this moment, he directly pointed out the crux of the problem with a smile on his face. Since Sir Grimm has made a mistake, the only way for the Silver Alliance to let it go is to hand over the Void Stone. Of course, we won't take it for free. We'll buy it at a price that both parties can accept. As for you, Nunnally, don't even think about getting involved. I can use my authority to give you 2% of the Byron family's resources from my personal share as compensation. What do you think? The Ratfolk Councilman Pyro smiled and stopped Nunnally's unrealistic thoughts. Nunnally hesitated for a moment, but in the face of such a powerful councilman, he could only accept it helplessly. As for Grimm's opinion, to be honest, it was no longer important at this time. The only thing he could do was to make his request and do his best to minimize his losses. Say it, kid. The Ratfolk Councilman Pyro was obviously quite satisfied with this unexpected gain, and his mood became much better. What do you want in return? The loss of the Void Stone was within Grimm's expectations, so he pretended to be in great pain on the surface, but his heart was racing. Sir, I'm also quite interested in voodoo puppets. I came to Sky City this time to collect some knowledge related to voodoo puppets, as well as some resources to manufacture puppets. Also, I've always been interested in puppet amulets. Grimm softly stated his conditions as he stared at the Ratfolk Councilman Pyro's expression. Bargaining completely depended on the bottom line of both parties. If he asked for too little, he would be letting down his Void Stone, and if he asked for too much, he might incur the Ratfolk Councilman Pyro's displeasure. Hence, when Grimm mentioned the puppet amulets, he saw the Ratfolk Councilman Pyro's sharp, furry face tremble, and he knew that he should not raise the price. Voodoo puppet knowledge, resources, and puppet amulets. The Ratfolk Councilman Pyro frowned and pondered for a moment, before reluctantly nodding in agreement. I can't give you the advanced knowledge of the Alliance, but universal voodoo puppets are not a problem. As for resources, I can allocate a batch of resources from the warehouse, enough for you to manufacture 20 standard voodoo puppets. You can choose any type you want. Puppet amulets, that's the most difficult thing to obtain. The Alliance's rules forbid the sale of such strategic treasures to non-members. However, I do have a simple product that isn't restricted by the Alliance's rules. I can give it to you now. Let's see if the Void Stone in your hand is worth these things. The Ratfolk Councilman Pyro slowly stated the price he could afford. However, his eyes immediately lit up as he stared at the gray Void Stone in Grimm's hand. That size, that quality. The Ratfolk Councilman Pyro's thin face twitched slightly. He quickly grabbed the Void Stone and sent a few puffs of black smoke into it, silently inspecting the detailed data inside. After a while, a look of surprise finally appeared on his face. It seemed that the quality of this Void Stone was far higher than his estimation. Randolph, take him to my wizard tower and give him all the knowledge and resources. Just follow the standards I mentioned just now, and let him choose any he wants. Also, kid, this is for you. As the Ratfolk Councilman Pyro spoke, a pin-like crystal amulet was thrown into Grimm's arms. Puppet amulet. This was the puppet amulet. Grimm suppressed his excitement and put away the puppet amulet. After bowing to the Ratfolk Councilman Pyro again, he left the small courtroom with Randolph. It was obvious that Randolph and the Ratfolk Councilman Pyro had some special relationship, otherwise, Randolph would not have brought Grimm to him. There were no less than 12 small courtrooms surrounding the Circular Alliance Parliament Hall, and there were even 5 Grade 3 councilmen stationed in them. Yet, Randolph had brought Grimm to the Ratfolk Councilman Pyro's place. Grimm would not believe that Randolph did not have any personal intentions. The Ratfolk Councilman Pyro's wizard tower was still located in the central district. When Grimm and Nunnally arrived at the wizard tower under Randolph's guidance, a magic puppet butler was already waiting for them. Nunnally did not follow them in, but waited outside with Randolph. Only Grim followed the marionette into the wizard tower. Perhaps the councilman did not want Grim to peek into the secrets of his wizard tower, so he only took a few steps into the wizard tower when a dazzling lightning fence appeared in front of him. The lightning fence separated the space inside the wizard tower into different paths, and at the end of each path was a small short-distance teleportation spell formation. The magic puppet butler turned around and walked on one of the paths, and Grim had no choice but to follow. When the light from the teleportation spell formation dimmed, Grim found himself in a large private library. In the huge circular room, there were layers upon layers of bookshelves along the walls, filled with countless books, scrolls, and scrolls on witchcraft. Most of the books were flashing with the dazzling light of a defensive spell formation, faintly resonating with the defense system of the library. Many strange little elves were shuttling back and forth between the bookshelves, as if they were doing some maintenance work. Of course, these little elves were not real living creatures, but puppets made of a special material that could not be identified. Master wants to prepare a general knowledge of witchcraft puppets that are grade 2 and below. The magic puppet butler's voice was metallic, but it was very clear. After receiving the order, all the little elves in the room immediately got busy. They quickly shuttled between the bookshelves, using their slender arms to carry out one book after another. Chapter 297. 2 hours later, Grim came out of Ratman Counselor Pyro's wizard tower. On the way back to the Byron family's encampment, Wizard Nunnally stared at Grim and said calmly, "If you have any more void stones, the Byron family is willing to buy them at an extremely high price. I guarantee you'll be satisfied." Being stared at by the other party, even with Grim's composure, he could not help but break out in cold sweat. However, he could still control himself and forced a smile. "My lady, that void stone of mine is a trophy from the planar war. Since I'm not familiar with its characteristics, I recklessly tested it. As for the consequences, you've seen it for yourself." After saying this, Grim's face revealed a look of extreme regret. Wizard Nunnally stared at Grim calmly for a long time before withdrawing her gaze and not saying anything else. The atmosphere in the carriage was rather awkward. When they returned to the encampment, they found that everything had returned to normal. The combat team sent out by the Sky Guards had long since left, and the encampment had returned to normal. Even the damaged ground had been repaired by the Magi who stayed behind. 2% of the resources promised by Ratman Counselor Pyro sounded like a small amount, but it was enough to make the Byron family one of the top shops in the 12th district. As soon as Nunnally returned to the encampment, she gathered all the Magi in the family and began to make some appropriate arrangements for the future development. Of course, Nunnally would definitely interrogate Wizard Angus in detail in private. Information about Grim would also be sent to the central continent through some secret channels. However, all of this was destined to be in vain. With the speed of Grim's rise, most families in the scattered Tower Forest region would not have heard of his name. Even Grim's other rather popular title of Fire Demon only had a little influence around Ferdinand City. Apart from that, it would be extremely difficult for anyone to dig out any more information. After all, with the fall of the Swamp Tower, all the acolytes who knew of him had already turned into dried bones. Everything that happened in the magic swamp would be covered up by time. However, Grim no longer had the strength to understand the subtle psychological changes the Byron family had towards him. Once he returned to the encampment, the first thing he did was to summon Kobe to his room, and the two of them started a secret discussion. When the dense protective spell covered the whole room, Grim stared at Cabby with an ugly expression and said sternly, "Speak. What did you get for making such a big mess for me this time?" But soon after, Grim was shocked by what Kirby took out. The blueprint of the Fell Reaver. A sample of the magic energy cannon and its manufacturing blueprint. 7 high-purity elemental crystal cores. Ignoring the goblin Cabby, Grim's eyes flashed with blue light. The AI. Chip used the shortest amount of time to scan the blueprints into his brain, and quickly began to construct a holographic model based on the data. Soon, 100-meter-tall mechanical giant with a deafening berserk energy engine and a thick, cumbersome mechanical construct that emanated frightening magical radiance was born. Its main attack method was to rely on its sturdy body and terrifying weight to crush its enemies. When such a large mechanical body raised its huge metallic foot and wantonly crushed the mortal army, the sound of flesh and bones being crushed would indeed be effective in destroying the morale and confidence of its enemies. However, its enemies were destined to be the mortal armies. If it wanted to rely on such trash to fight against magi, perhaps a small swamp spell would be able to easily defeat it. However, such a fell reaver was not completely trash. At least from the blueprint, the energy barrier and the method of using magic energy to protect the body's core still had some research value. It could be seen that the Goblin Empire that designed this blueprint did not have a complete set of spells. Perhaps the goblins were a group of people who were insulated from spells. They lacked the means to directly use elemental force, so they could only focus on the fusion of elemental force and mechanical construct. It was no wonder that they called this gigantic mechanical giant a fell reaver. It was practically a Gundam from another world. However, it was not powered by mysterious spell formations or runes, but by a combination of elemental force and metallic machinery. Magic machinery? Calling it a magic machinery is quite appropriate. After understanding this fell reaver from another world, Grimm simply scanned the book on witchcraft puppets into his mind and began to model them one by one before converting them into data. In terms of the essence, magic machinery and the goblins from the sorcerer world were related by blood. Both of them used their huge bodies and sturdy bodies to crush their enemies. The difference was, the goblins had an animated mechanical heart within their bodies, so they had some basic human-like intelligence. Therefore, magi only needed to give them some simple instructions and they would be left alone. Magic machinery, on the other hand, was just a machine. Although it had a magical energy system, it did not have any independent intelligence to speak of. Therefore, the operation of magic machinery could not be separated from the control of intelligent life forms. The core of the goblins was the mechanical heart, while the core of magic machinery was a small console. This was perhaps the only difference between the two. Seriously speaking, magic cannons were also a type of use of magic energy. They could guide the energy stored in magic crystals and release it in the form of pure energy. When a fire elemental crystal was inserted into a magic cannon, the attack form was similar to a witchcraft fireball. However, the goblins called it an energy bomb. When an ice elemental crystal was inserted, it would fire a freezing ray. When an electric elemental crystal was inserted, it would turn into a taser gun. When a negative energy crystal was inserted, it would fire a corrosive ray. Although the goblins did not have any talent in spells, they were good at using energy. Grimm estimated that even the ordinary version of the magic cannons could reach an astonishing 20 to 30 degrees of damage per shot. This attack power was indeed a little low compared to a wizard's spell attack that could reach up to 100 degrees. However, magic cannons were not like witchcraft equipment that could only be used by wizards with elemental talent. Magic cannons were a completely simplified elemental crystal launcher. Even an ordinary person would instantly have the power of an advanced wizard apprentice. The goblins were not stupid. They would not sell their most powerful weapon to cabbie. If these magic cannons were the lowest level of magic weapons, they would only need to develop magic weapons with an attack power of 100 degrees to instantly give their people the power of a magus. Moreover, the cooldown time of magic weapons was short, so they could basically achieve this. This allowed them to have a higher attack frequency when fighting against acolyte. 10 ugly goblins equipped with magic cannons could easily overturn 10 fully armed sorcerer apprentices. If the entire goblin plane was popularized with magic weapons, their overall power would be comparable to some medium-sized planes. However, Grimm's crazy conjecture was quickly rejected by the AI chip. The reason it rejected was also irrefutable. The so-called Goblin Empire's overall power could not reach Grimm's conjecture. The main reason they were limited in their development was the lack of elemental crystals. As the saying goes, success is due to low magic, failure is also due to low magic. It was precisely because the Goblin Empire was in a plane with low magic power that they generally lacked talent in magic and were forced to walk the path of magic technology. However, for magic technology to develop rapidly, a large source of energy was indispensable. The Goblin plane with low magic power naturally did not have a large reserve of elemental crystals, so they had to find another suitable source of energy to develop their magic technology. From this perspective, Grimm was very optimistic about the Goblin Empire. As long as they could solve the problem of the source of magical energy, with their use of magical weapons and machinery, the goblins would rapidly rise as a powerful armed force that would raise eyebrows in the multiverse. To be honest, if he could control such a natural servant race, Grimm felt that it would not be a problem for him to conquer the universe. However, before he had absolute power, it was impossible to suppress these wild goblins, so he could only bear with it. Only when his strength reached a new level and his subordinates had enough chips to deal with a planar war would he have the chance to consider invading this so-called Goblin Empire. With this understanding, Grimm could only comfort the goblin cabbie with gentle words to boost his courage. He even specially approved a batch of resources and funds for Cabbie to maintain contact with the Goblin Empire from another plane. However, in order to avoid raising a tiger, Grimm drew a red line for Cabbie. What kinds of things could be traded and what kinds of things couldn't be traded, everything was listed clearly. Grimm wanted Cabbie to keep Gaz Ruvi hanging with continuous trades, but he could not really nurture this vicious wolf into a ferocious tiger. Hence, every time he made a deal with Gaz Ruvi, Grimm had to personally look over the items and check them strictly. Cabbie could only be a yes-man towards this point. In Cabbie's eyes, integrity, loyalty, and kinship were all fleeting clouds. The only thing he needed to care about was obtaining his master's favor. As for selling out his own race to his master, as long as the price was right, he would gladly do it. Chapter 298. When the moon once again climbed up to the sky, the cold and desolate light shone through the thick fog into the mushroom hut. Alice held on to the almost red-hot soup pot, silently raising her head to look at the wisp of moonlight that shone through the cracks of the wooden hut. Her bloodshot eyes were filled with deep despair, sorrow, and numbness. Crying, begging, cursing, she had already done everything she could in the past few days. Unfortunately, facing a stubborn old witch, regardless of whether she pretended or revealed her true feelings, they were all ignored by the other party. The only thing the old witch would do every day was to stand on a tall wooden stool, stirring the soup pot with a huge wooden ladle while rambling on and on about some stories that no one could understand. And that hateful black snake was entrenched on the roof beam above the soup pot. Every time Alice wanted to escape, it would appear at the right time, hissing and flicking its tongue to force her back. The gloomy swamp, the scary haunted house, the ugly witch, and the creepy black snake, all of this sounded like a bizarre dark fairy tale. But what it brought to Alice was unbearable torture and suffering. Alice could not sleep and did not dare to sleep. Every time she fell asleep, the space barrier on the surface of her body would disappear, and what awaited her was the boiling soup. Her tender, white, and petite body would be scalded red, instantly covered with big and small blisters and festering bright red flesh. And when she mournfully wailed in the soup pot, no matter where she was, the old witch would run over excitedly, scooping up the scarlet soup with a ladle, and drink it in one gulp. In the old witch's own words, the soup that was soaked in Alice's blood carried a trace of the taste of fate. Therefore, the only thing Alice could do was to maintain a clear mind at all times, using all her strength to fight against the exhaustion of her body. Every time she felt that she could not hold on any longer, she would silently remove the space barrier on her left hand, and then use the piercing pain to stimulate her tired spirit, driving away the heavy drowsiness. After a few days, her left hand had been steamed by the boiling soup until there was not a single inch of flesh left unscathed, and a thick layer of purplish-black blood crusted over. Before he could completely heal, a new burn would appear. In this way, Alice barely made it through the last 2 days. When Grim appeared in the mushroom hut, Alice was on the verge of a mental breakdown. He was in a daze and seemed to have lost all sense of the changes in the outside world. But what was surprising was that even in this situation, Alice was still wrapped in a thin layer of space membrane that protected her from the boiling soup. Seeing Alice's miserable state, Grim's heart of the Balrog in his chest violently beat twice, and he almost broke free from the witchcraft seal. The anger in his heart burned through his entire body. 10 days have passed. I'm here to take Alice away, Grim said coldly. He then reached his arms into the boiling hot pot and scooped up Alice. Seeing Alice's completely purplish-black left hand and the spots of festering skin and blood crusts on her body, Grim's black eyes lit up with 2 small flames. He used his last bit of rationality to suppress his anger, and with both hands holding Alice's weightless body, he turned around and strode away. What was strange was that the short and stooped old witch only watched all this with a smile, and did not interfere with Grim's actions. When Grim's tall body was completely covered by the dark swamp's fog, the old witch stopped smiling and let out a mournful cry like an owl. Fate! 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 When Alice woke up again, she was already in a clean and bright room. The room was decorated very simply. A single bed, a chair, and a brown wooden table were all the furnishings in the room. In front of the wooden table, a tall and sturdy figure was sitting there, quietly reading a book. Alice wriggled a little under the soft lace of the quilt. However, based on the silky touch, she could sense that she wasn't wearing any clothes. At the same time, a cooling sensation came from the wounds all over her body. Mixed with the burning pain, it made her feel unbearably itchy. Alice gently raised her left hand, which was wrapped in a dense white cloth like a dumpling. She brought it to her nose and sniffed, and could smell the scent of hemostatic cream and toner. Her mouth felt numb and bitter, and when she stuck out her tongue, she realized that there was a leaf of life in her mouth. Humph, you threw me to that old witch without saying a word, and now you want to win me over with these small favors? Dream on. She did not know why, but even though she was disdainful, Alice could not stop her tears from flowing down. With a magus' keen senses, even the smallest movements in the room could not escape his eyes. When Alice's eyes blurred with tears, Grim's tall figure had already appeared in front of the bed, bending over and looking down at her. Does your wound still hurt? Yes. I've already applied medicine on it. With your physique, you should be able to fully recover in 2 or 3 days, and there won't be any obvious scars. Yes. After the simple conversation, there was an indescribable silence. They had all been acolytes before, and had all climbed their way up from the bottom. They had experienced at least 800, if not 1,000 terrifying hardship. In comparison, the torture they had suffered this time was not the worst. No matter which acolyte it was, they had to bear all the suffering alone. Even if they bled to the point of tears, no one would bear it for them. Hence, regardless of whether they were magi or acolytes, they had developed a cold and unsociable temperament. Hence, at this moment, Grim, who had taken the initiative to show concern, and Alice, who was being cared for, did not know how to continue. Alice, where did you stay for 10 days? Do you know why that old witch treated you like this? Grim suddenly thought of a question, and could not help but ask. What other reason could there be? Of course it's because she's gone mad. She's a nervous woman. Alice gnashed her teeth at the thought of the torture she had suffered during this time. I have a feeling. Grim frowned and hesitated. What kind of feeling? She seems to want to help you. Grim hesitated for a moment and finally said what was in his mind. Help me. Alice's eyes were wide open, and she almost jumped out of the quilt. She waved her left hand angrily and roared, I've been hurt so badly by her, and you still say she wants to help me? Are you crazy? Grim was not frightened by Alice's angry roar, and a thoughtful expression appeared on his face. You and I both know very well that the Northern Witches are a closed group that is very particular about tradition and inheritance. That Loanna belongs to a different school of witches, so she won't easily hurt you to avoid interfering with the selection of the Destiny Witches. So what? If what we know is true, don't you think her behavior is very strange? Of course she's strange because she's already gone mad. Alice, calm down. Don't let anger confuse your reason. Think carefully about what kind of message she wants to send you with this behavior. Alice still shook her head in confusion. Her behavior makes you very angry and also makes you feel very weak. So what do you want the most when your emotions are brewing to the extreme? Power. Yes, it's power. You need power to strengthen yourself, and you need power to avenge yourself. So where does your power come from? Where does my power come from? Alice repeated in confusion. You've awakened the talent of the Destiny Witches. Although there are many Destiny Witches who awaken at the same time, you have to find the source of your power. Alice shook her head as if she didn't understand. Although she was talented and intelligent, she still couldn't keep up with Grim's rapid thinking due to the lack of experience. You must always remember the source of your power, Grim patiently taught her. You've awakened the talent of the Destiny Witches, so the source of your power can only belong to the word destiny. Alice, let me ask you, do you believe in destiny? Alice raised her head and looked at Grim's determined eyes. She finally began to seriously think about the true meaning of the talent of the Destiny Witches for the first time. Do I believe in destiny? Do I believe in destiny? Alice asked herself over and over again, and for a while, she became dumbfounded. Yes, ever since she awakened her talent, the power of space had become like an instinct to her. It became an ability that she could summon and leave at will. Relying on this powerful talent, she could almost easily defeat all opponents of the same rank. Her great power made her confused. Everyone's respect and praise made her feel like she was floating. One success after another made her intoxicated, and she had forgotten where her real power came from. Destiny? Destiny. Thinking back to the journey after becoming a wizard apprentice, she seemed to have never consciously understood or grasped the meaning of destiny. She just enjoyed the glory that the talent of destiny brought her, but she never tried to approach it or understand it. At this moment, when she successfully tasted the humiliation of being weak, when she once again yearned for greater power, what should she do? Should she meditate day after day like other wizards, accumulate knowledge and resources, and strengthen her power, or Alice suddenly felt lost. Even if she recognized her own path forward and understood the nature of her power, how could she understand the illusory fate? Could it be that shouting, "Destiny, I believe in you," to the sky would give her more power? Alice still couldn't find a clear way out. She finally raised her head and looked at Grim with hope in her eyes. What should I do? Teach me. This was the first time that Alice had sincerely begged. Do you believe in destiny? Grim asked again in a serious tone. Chapter 299. Would the followers of the Destiny Witches not believe in fate? This question seemed absurd, but it struck Alice like a bolt of lightning, instantly making her dumbfounded. I of course believe in fate, Alice answered hesitantly, but her tone was getting smaller and weaker. Ever since she had the strange spatial talent, she had regarded this as her instinct, and had never tried to trace it back to its source. As for the illusory fate that gave her all this, except for when Alice would inadvertently think of it and praise it a few times in her spare time. During the days when she became an apprentice, fate was like a non-existent god, with no sense of existence at all. There were less than 9 years left before the selection ceremony of the Destiny Witches. It could be imagined that all the people who had awakened the bloodline talent of the Destiny Witches would gather in the north, where the real Destiny Witch would be decided. And there was only one place for the Destiny Witch. Once one of the awakened ones held the ceremony to officially become the Destiny Witch, the rest of the awakened ones would die a painful death, and all the power of fate would gather on the real Destiny Witch. So, today, 8 years later, Alice would either live or die. At that time, she would face the first life and death limit in her journey of fate. So what was it that decided her fate? Strength? Of course, if Alice had the strength of a level 2 wizard after 8 years, it would not be a problem to sweep the rest of the awakened ones. At that time, no one would be able to take the title of Destiny Witch from her hands. But was this possible? 8 years was not a long time, but it was not a short time either. If Alice worked hard enough, she was still very sure that she could smoothly advance to an official wizard, but it was absolutely impossible to jump to a level 2 wizard. It could be imagined that there would be a lot of awakened ones who could become wizards, and how could she stand out from the many awakened ones and suppress the others? Her spatial talent was indeed excellent enough, and her strength was also strong enough, but how much worse could the other awakened ones' talents be compared to her? In this cruel competition of life and death, no awakened one would be willing to give up their own life to save others. Therefore, the selection of the Destiny Witch was bound to be extremely cruel and bloody. Those awakened ones who were not prepared or did not make sufficient preparations were destined to become stepping stones for others. They would wail in pain as they watched others step onto the high platform of fate, and then take away all the talents, bloodlines, and abilities that originally belonged to them. Alice's face turned white with fear at the thought of such a terrible and tragic scene. For the first time in her life, Alice felt as if she could not use up all the energy in her body. She clenched her small fists and tried to encourage herself. "Alice, you can do it. Come on, work hard. I will definitely become the most powerful witch." Ouch! Before she could finish the motivational ceremony, Grim knocked her on the head. "If you are determined to be the most powerful witch, I can say with certainty that you will never become a Destiny Witch." Grim glared at her fiercely. "Looks like I'll have to reconsider if I should continue to invest in you." "Why?" Alice bared her canine teeth angrily. "If I don't work hard to become the strongest, how can I defeat them?" "Use your brain, idiot." Grim shook his head as if the other party was hopeless. "You chose the Destiny Witches." "The Destiny Witches." The core of this profession is always the word destiny. Therefore, it doesn't need the most powerful one, but the one closest to destiny. Alice's body was only the size of an 8-year-old girl, but her mental age was only 15 or 16. Although she was intelligent and gifted with profound knowledge, when it came to the heavy topic of destiny, she could not grasp it at all. "Then I don't have to work on improving my strength anymore, and I can use all my time to study destiny?" Alice asked timidly. Bang. Before she could say anything, she was knocked on the head again. "Why did you hit me again?" Alice held her head with both hands and pouted. She felt so wrong that she was about to cry. "Didn't you say that the Destiny Witches rely on destiny, not strength? Why can't you understand?" Grim had a look of exasperation on his face. "Strength is your guarantee of survival. Destiny is the key to your victory. So you have to improve your strength first and ensure that you can survive. Only then will you have a chance to win. I dare say that the first batch of Destiny Witches to be eliminated will definitely be those who do not have the strength to advance to become wizard. And then, as for those who advance to become wizards, if they can't do anything to each other, then destiny will be the only thing they can rely on. But how can something like destiny be strengthened? That's simple. You have to advance to become a wizard as soon as possible so that you have the strength to survive. After that, work hard to learn divination and prophecy. After all, this is the ultimate weapon that decides your life and death. Then what do I need to do now? The first thing you need to do now is to find a way to make yourself believe in destiny. It was not a false verbal belief, but a genuine, wholehearted belief. You can lie to me, but you can't lie to your heart, and you can't lie to destiny. So, little girl, from today onwards, work hard to become a believer of destiny. Alice held her head in her hands and nodded heavily in the quilt. After Alice fell into a deep sleep once more, Grim sat by the wooden table and took out a crystal talisman in the shape of a pin to study it. This was the puppet talisman that Ratfolk Counselor Paro had traded with him. With it, Grim could easily carry his first metal golem around with him after he created it. When Grim had first obtained it, he had thought of using the AI chip's data scanning and analysis abilities to decipher the mysteries within the puppet talisman. Then, he could mass-produce them himself. However, after a few days of fumbling around, this unrealistic fantasy was shattered. Damn it, this puppet amulet isn't a dimensional space that can store giant metal puppets like I expected. It's a strange witchcraft. The puppet talisman that could store a 10-meter-tall war golem with a wave of his hand was not a spatial equipment, but a sealing spell. Seeing this, Grim could not help but be enraged. He had originally thought that with Alice's spatial innate talent and the Void Stone, he would be able to successfully clone the puppet talisman as long as he could decipher the barrier. Who would have thought that he would end up empty-handed? Thinking about it again, Grim couldn't help but be amused by his delusions. If the puppet talisman was so easy to decipher, the Silver Alliance would not have monopolized this technique for thousands of years. Nowadays, high-ranked magi from the other large organizations could only travel hundreds of millions of miles to the Silver Alliance to seek help if they wanted to carry a metal golem with them. The Magus Association in the eastern part of the continent had gathered many powerful magi, but they still couldn't decipher this puppet talisman seal. After studying it for 2 days, Grim confirmed that he could not decipher this seal with his current abilities, so he could only give up. After putting away the puppet talisman, Grim couldn't help but start to think about his next journey. His main mission in Sky City had been completed. Although he wanted to stay for a while longer in this area where arcane magi gathered, he felt that it would be safer to return to Ferdinand City as soon as possible after considering the negative effects of the Void Stone. After making up his mind, Grim immediately contacted Wizard Angus and asked him to help him book a ticket back to the Scattered Tower Forest in 10 days. He and the Goblin Cabbie went on a crazy shopping spree. Every day they would frequently go to the shops in the Outer Ring, trying their best to collect things that would be useful to them. Grim had already earned a large amount of magic crystals after helping the Byron family win the arcane competition. Now, he decided to go on a shopping spree. He spent almost all the magic crystals he had on him, exchanging them for countless materials, resources, and knowledge. At the beginning, Grim was hoping to buy a batch of potions that could help increase his power of the will. However, after asking around for a couple of shops, he gave up. The reason was that it was too expensive. Super expensive too. Eris Nightmare was a potion that could help increase the power of the will of an official magus. Every time it was used, it could increase a magus power of the will by 0.12. Its base price was 1,400 magic crystals per bottle, and it had a huge side effect. Just like its name suggested, magi who used this potion would suddenly fall into a strange illusion at a certain time every night. They could not break free with their own strength, and no one could wake them up. Only by silently enduring the nightmare for 2 hours could the person involved wake up. Such a terrifying side effect was a huge safety hazard for the magus who took the potion. As for the other potion, the evil spirit water, it was even more terrifying. Magi who used this potion would be especially favored by vengeful spirits and undead for a long period of time. If they did not take precautions, it was extremely easy for them to be possessed by evil spirits. Therefore, magi who had consumed the evil spirit water would not dare to explore any ancient ruins or tombs. Otherwise, they would be like a magnet, attracting all the spirits out of the place. Any magus with a brain would feel their hairs stand on end and their souls would not be able to leave their bodies. Most of the other magus potions were the same. They all had a despairing price and terrifying side effect. If Grimm wanted to increase his power of the will by taking potions, he would need to increase it by 10 or 8 times. Chapter 300. Compared to the excitement on the way here, the return journey was rather dull. They were still in the same regions, but when the floating warship flew over, the number of monsters that dared to chase it had decreased significantly. At first, Grimm had some doubts, but after communicating with the Magi on the ship, he found out that the Harpy Kingdom had forcibly abducted a few Magi. This had undoubtedly enraged the higher-ups of the Silver Alliance, who were in charge of the safety of the sea route. Thus, while Grimm was in Sky City, the Silver Alliance had organized a group of Grade 3 Magi to forcefully break into the Harpy Kingdom, slaughtering almost 1,000 enemies in one go, including a few bird shamans. As for the Magi who had been abducted, unfortunately, they only managed to save 2. The rest of them hadn't survived the brutal mating process and had been drained of their essence blood. As for the 2 that survived, they were both physique refinement Magi with physiques similar to magical beasts. Unfortunately, by the time they were rescued, they had already been sucked dry. It seemed that without a year or 2 of meticulous care, they would not be able to return to normal. It was precisely because of the Silver Alliance's actions that the monsters on this sea route had temporarily calmed down. Thus, 2.5 months later, Grimm brought Alice and Cabby back to the central continent. Their first stop was, of course, Guat Port, a public city in the westernmost part of the scattered Talon region. After staying here for 2 days, Grimm and his party waited for an airship to leave for the central continent. Thus, after 5 days, they successfully returned to Moda City. Not daring to stay in Moda City for too long, Grimm and the other 2 secretly bought a small carriage and left the city. In the pitch-black forest, a temporary bonfire crackled as it burned. The goblin Cabby was busy preparing dinner. He set up a metal tripod on top of the fire, placed a pot of soup, and began to wash the ingredients. Alice, on the other hand, rested her chin on her hands and sat by the bonfire in a daze. Ever since Grimm had taught her a lesson, she had been like this a lot. Grimm and Cabby greeted each other, then stood up and walked into the dark forest. He wanted to see what the wilderness of another world looked like before dinner. The trees of the Sorcerer Continent had always grown tall and straight. Coupled with the dense foliage, the forest was dark and silent. Only a few moonlight grasses and fluorescent mushrooms faintly emitted a cold light. There were no bushes, no knee-high grass, just dewy brown earth, covered with a thick layer of yellow leaves, and then patches of green grass. There are very few small animals here. After all, it was close to a public road, so it was impossible for there to be any large magical beasts. The rest of the wild beasts in the forest had mostly become practice targets for the sorcerer apprentices. Therefore, Grimm didn't see any herbivores or carnivores even after walking for half a mile in the dark. Just as Grimm was about to turn back in disappointment, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. Grimm turned his head to look at the flank and suddenly became more vigilant. There, a tall humanoid figure was walking over with heavy footstep. The rotten branches were crushed one by one under his feet, making crackling sounds. In the quiet and dark forest, the sound traveled very far. Grimm licked his lips and narrowed his eyes. A faint blue light flickered in his eyes. He was fully prepared to fight. Secretly, he sent a warning to Alice and Cabby through the telepathic bond. Under the powerful scanning of elemental vision, The approaching humanoid figure was overflowing with intense red light. It was a sign of extreme danger and hostility. Moreover, Grim could sense a powerful yet reserved and terrifying aura from the other party. In Grim's retina, the energy in the figure's body was extremely strong. Most of the energy nodes were distributed in the limbs, some important joints, and some internal organs. This allowed Grim to determine that the visitor was a physique refinement magus. In the dead of the night, and in a secluded and uninhabited forest, the other party's intentions were clear without question. Grim was just curious. He had been very low-key when he returned, so how did the Unlucky Hand Association find his traces? "Your fire devil, Grim?" The tall figure spoke and stopped 30 meters away. The voice was deep and rich. It was a man's voice. At this moment, the tall figure took another step forward. A ray of silver moonlight shone on him through the treetops, illuminating his appearance and figure. It was a powerful anatomy refinery wizard wearing blood-red metal armor. His body was surrounded by blood-red ripples, and he carried a huge two-handed sword on his back. Under the moonlight, his face was twisted and hideous, and the ugly scars on his face wriggled like centipedes. He also wore blood-red metal gloves on his hands. When he clenched his fists, the edges of his knuckles were as sharp as knives. It was a chilling sight. "Bloody Butcher?" Grim asked in a probing tone. The figure's appearance was quite unique, so Grim quickly thought of some legendary figures. "It's useless even if you know my name. You will die here today." The Bloody Butcher grinned and showed a hideous smile. In the next second, before the powerful voice faded away, a red shadow had already approached Grim's side. A violent and ferocious iron fist with a whistling wind and a pungent smell of blood was aimed at his heart. A black and red lava shield appeared between the two of them. Before the high-temperature flames on the shield could burn the shield, the iron fist of the blood shadow landed right in the middle of the shield. With a loud bang, the lava shield shattered. The first time, before Grim's lava shield could fully materialize, it had already been smashed into smithereens and lava fragments by the enemy's heavy blows. Whoosh! The iron fist that was wrapped in flames penetrated the dense protective barrier and hit Grim's abdomen. Although the lava shield had dissipated almost half of the iron fist's power, the remaining power was not weaker than an elemental attack of 60 degrees. Moreover, most elemental attacks were scattered. The power of the attack was scattered but not concentrated. However, the iron fist of the opponent was completely restrained, only concentrating the power of the attack into an area the size of a fist. Therefore, elemental attacks could not be compared to elemental attack. Grim was startled. He suddenly patted his chest, and a resistance ring of fire suddenly bloomed. The resistance ring of fire was a powerful shockwave of flames, but it spread in a ring shape. All individuals within the range of the flames would not only suffer from the damage of the flames, but also a certain degree of physical impact. Therefore, the resistance ring of fire was usually used by fire wizards to repel their enemies. However, it was too difficult to repel an anatomy wizard with a hastily released ring of fire. As a result, Grim staggered backwards, his chest was struck by the wind from the punch, and his entire body was sent flying. While he was still in the air, the sound of bones cracking came from Grim's chest, and he spat out a mouthful of black blood. Blood Shadow roared, and the bloody aura around his body exploded in front of him. With a single step, he chased after Grim's falling body. Two iron fists attacked consecutively, and the surging blood shadow smashed towards Grim like raindrops. There was a loud explosion. Flames burst out in the dark forest. Grim's tall body instantly disappeared in the pillar of fire that shot up into the sky. At the same time, 100 meters away from where the two were fighting, flames surged and Grim staggered backwards. The bloody figure roared again. Twisting his body in midair, he once again shot towards Grim like an arrow. "Die!" Grim shouted in a low voice, and with a raise of his hand, 3 explosive fireballs flew towards his opponent in a triangular formation. As soon as the explosive fireballs left his hand, Grim raised his right palm into the air, and a lava fireball the size of a washbasin quickly formed. Blood Shadow did not choose to dodge the 3 exploding fireballs that were flying at him. As an experienced anatomy refinery sorcerer, he knew this very well. Once he chose to dodge, then the opponent would continuously throw elemental spells at him. If he allowed the opponent to increase the distance between them, then the terrifying power of a fire wizard would be fully displayed. Therefore, without hesitation, the Bloody Butcher raised both of his arms to cover his face, and a powerful bloody aura surged around his body. He actually chose to take the explosive fireballs head-on. Bang bang bang, after 3 consecutive explosions, the dark forest was dyed red. The violent elemental flames engulfed everything within a 20-meter radius into a sea of fire. Tall trees that could be hugged by a person were instantly set ablaze, and wood shavings and debris were ignited by the sea of fire. The intense flames were blinding. The valiant Blood Shadow rushed through the center of the explosion, and as soon as he reached the edge of the sea of fire, he saw a rapidly flying lava fireball and a figure not far away. Damn it, this fire demon's casting speed is really scary. While cursing in his heart, the Bloody Butcher pulled out his sword and rushed forward. The sword in his hand shone with a cold bloody light as it directly cut through the lava fireball. When he tried to follow suit and rush through the lava fireball again, a huge flaming fist opened up in front of him and forcefully pushed him back into the sea of fire. Within the shattered lava fireball, scarlet lava scattered on the green grass, and in an instant, the ground was scorched. A tall humanoid figure surrounded by fierce flames stood there silently, blocking the Bloody Butcher's path of attack. Under the cover of the Inferno Tyrant, Grim finally found an opportunity. He took out 2 or 3 bottles of potions of different colors from his waist pouch, and drank them all in one go. After dealing with the injuries on his body, Grim raised his head, and 2 clusters of bright flames quickly burned in his black eyes. Chapter 301. In the dark forest there was more than one battlefield. Through the faint night fog, a huge elemental roar could be heard from the temporary camp in the distance. The sudden explosion of elemental waves swept everything around it, turning the small temporary camp into a turbulent sea of elemental wave. Even from half a mile away, Grim could clearly feel the terrifying aura that could destroy the world. Through the soul contract, he could know that Alice and Cabby were not dead, and were frantically escaping from the destroyed camp. But were there any pursuers behind them? Had they escaped the pursuit of the opposing sorcerer? All of this was an unknown factor, and if he wanted to rescue them, the first thing he needed to do was to defeat this damned sorcerer in front of him, the Bloody Butcher. Just as Grim was hesitating, the Inferno Tyrant and the Bloody Butcher had already started fighting in a frenzy. In the sea of fire, the Inferno Tyrant's tall flaming body was slashed by the other party until sparks flew and the flames surged. And the wild flames that splashed recklessly also burned the Bloody Butcher, causing him to scream in pain. Even the 2-handed sword in his hand began to heat up in the terrifying flames, gradually turning into a red-hot soldering iron. The Bloody Butcher's sturdy body emitted even more blood-colored energy that lingered around him, protecting his body from being burnt into charcoal by the terrifying heat. But this kind of protection could not last long. He had to cut down this peak level, one fire elemental in the shortest amount of time, or else this simple blood barrier would eventually be corroded by the flames. The blood-colored energy extended to the blade, and with the help of this super-corrosive blood energy, the Bloody Butcher's waving 2-handed sword also caused great damage to the fire elemental. But most of the time, the Bloody Butcher had to rely on his nimble steps to circle around the fire elemental, avoiding the other party's violent and ferocious fire spells. Every time a terrifying elemental fireball exploded near him, he could feel a stinging pain on the surface of his skin. 130 degrees or 140 degrees. Without accurate measurements, He did not know how strong the fire elemental's attack was, nor did he want to know. He only knew that every time the fire elemental roared and stretched out its hands towards him, he had to quickly dodge. Once he was hit, he wasn't confident that he could withstand the terrifying flame explosion with his high vitality. Although he knew from the intelligence that the target had a terrifying elemental puppet, the strength of this elemental puppet still exceeded his expectations. As a physique refinery wizard with a constitution of 17 points, the Bloody Butcher's physical and magical resistance had reached an astonishing level. It could even be compared to some coarse, thick-skinned magical beasts that specialized in defense. Even without the help of the blood-colored metal armor on his body, he could easily withstand elemental and physical attacks below 60 degrees naked. This also meant that even if he fought with a group of acolytes barehanded and naked, it would be difficult for them to harm his body in the slightest. On the other hand, he was able to withstand the attacks of enemies in the double digits and rush in front of them. Then, he would use his two-handed greatsword to crush them one by one as easily as killing cockroaches. However, even with such a strong body, the Bloody Butcher still did not dare to take the fire elemental's fireball head-on. He had a feeling that if he was hit by the fireball, it would be very painful. It had to be said that the Bloody Butcher's physical senses were very accurate. In Grimm's mind, every attack of the Inferno Tyrant's spells had already reached an astonishing 150 degrees. This was far beyond the highest threshold that a regular wizard could reach. Among all the species that had mastered extraordinary powers, the human body was undoubtedly one of the more fragile ones. Therefore, when human wizards absorbed and accumulated magical elements, the concentration of elements in their flesh per unit area was far lower than that of magical beasts. This was reflected in spells. The strength of a human wizard's elemental attack was limited by the strength of the body, toughness, and other factors. It was very difficult to reach the level of pure and violent attacks of magical beasts. Even with Grimm's elemental body and his specialization in fire, he could only increase the strength of his attack to 115 degrees. On the other hand, the Inferno Tyrant was indeed a powerful elemental demon puppet. Even though he did not have a strong body to match his level 2 essence crystal, the fire element spells that he could activate with just a wave of his hand were still terrifyingly powerful. 150 degrees. This was enough to kill some regular wizards in a second. Grimm endured the intense pain in his thoracic spine and straightened his body, sensing the movements in the distance. Although Alice was out of breath from being chased, she still took the time to warn Grimm. It was not one magus who had invaded the camp, but 2. If this anatomy refinement magus was included, the number of magi who had chased after him tonight had reached a shocking number of 3. At the end of the day, he was only a magus who had advanced. Grimm had seen the other party's strategy very clearly. They would use this anatomy refinement magus to hold him back, while the other 2 magi would quickly kill his servant. Then, the 3 of them would surround him and kill him in one fell swoop. From this attack strategy, it could be seen that the other party did not want the news of tonight to leak out. That was why they did not hesitate to use a sledgehammer to kill a chicken, and let the 2 magi lower themselves to chase after his servant. Since that was the case, there was nothing to hesitate about. Killing this anatomy refinement magus before the other 2 magi arrived was the only way to survive tonight. Raising his head, Grimm looked at the blood-red figure that was quickly cruising beside the Inferno Tyrant. He muttered a few strange and awkward-sounding incantations and pointed at the other party. The elemental flames that were everywhere around the blood-red figure suddenly condensed, and a strange flaming chain instantly wrapped around the other party's body. For an anatomy refinement magus with 17 points of vitality and 14 points of strength, a flaming chain with 5 points of elemental damage was just a small spell that could be easily shaken off. However, in the instant that the Bloody Butcher's figure was slightly sluggish, the Inferno Tyrant's foot exploded with a pillar of scarlet flames that connected the heavens and the earth. The Bloody Butcher's rough and ferocious face suddenly revealed a look of fear. A violent blood-red aura exploded, instantly shattering the flaming chain, and also dispersing the terrifying pillar of fire that enshrouded his body. He stomped heavily on the ground, leaving a pair of deep footprints on the charred ground. Only then did he manage to escape from the fire before the surrounding flames could close in on him. However, before he had a chance to catch his breath, the Inferno Tyrant's berserk fireballs and Grimm's lava fireballs came at him from the left and right. The Bloody Butcher's expression changed drastically, and his footsteps became faster and faster. His entire body turned into a blurry blood-red shadow, cruising around the fire quickly. Sorcery fireballs tore through the air and continuously exploded behind him. Every explosion would be accompanied by the collapse of 2 or 3 tall trees. On the other hand, the soil that shot up from the ground even caused a heavy rain to descend. Damn it, damn it, damn it! The Bloody Butcher's lungs were about to explode from the continuous stream of curses. That damned interception target, Grimm, stood about 20 meters away from the Inferno Tyrant, continuously throwing fire spells at him. Every time he tried to get close to the two people, a series of exploding fireballs and lava fireballs would fly at him. And the two people's fire barrier had merged together without a trace, so even though the Bloody Butcher was moving at high speed, he had to endure the burning of the flames at a rate of 30 degrees per second. Although this kind of damage could not do anything to his strong body, it could ignite his clothes at any time. If not for the blood-red metal armor that could protect him, he would probably have to run away at this moment. After all, he was only a physique refinery sorcerer with high vitality and strength. Speed was not his forte, and his main attack method was the two-handed sword with corrosive blood gas. If he was forced to the periphery by the opponent and could not get close, then he could only take a beating without being able to fight back. Whoosh! There was a sharp explosion. Half of a tree trunk whizzed towards Grimm. While still in midair, the tree trunk was hit by the lava fireball and exploded into sparks and debris. Then, in the next moment, a 1-meter square stone whistled towards him again. And it was also smashed into pieces by a series of fireballs in midair. Grimm suddenly turned around and raised his hands lightly. A lava fireball that had been waiting for power flew out quickly, and in front of the path of the fireball, the dense sea of fire suddenly shook violently and split open. The Bloody Butcher raised his two-handed sword high up and rushed out. The blood-red sword mark flashed quickly, and before the super lava fireball could explode, it had already chopped it into pieces of black and red lava. As for the tumbling lava that was wrapped in it, most of it was shaken away. With an earth-shattering roar, the Bloody Butcher's aura surged around him. He swung his huge two-handed sword like a rain of swords, which flew towards Grimm at high speed. If it was any other time, Grimm would have already used a flame leap to escape. Although his vitality was not bad, if he wanted to fight a professional physique refinery sorcerer in close combat, it would be a suicidal action. However, the situation on the battlefield today was dangerous. If this dragged on and he was surrounded by 3 sorcerers, then he would really be in danger. Therefore, facing the terrifying sword formation that was rolling towards him, Grimm did not escape. Instead, he crossed his arms in front of his chest, and a terrifying stream of fire elements condensed to the extreme collided with his opponent. Pooh! The sword formation that was spinning like a top did not slow down at all. It forcefully withstood the impact of the stream of fire and went against the flow, twisting towards Grimm's body bit by bit. The scarlet stream of fire elements was split into 2 in front of the rapidly spinning sword formation, sliding past it from the left and right. The distance between the 2 sides was less than 10 meters. Between them, apart from the torrent of fire elements that was like a lava waterfall, there was nothing else blocking their way. Both sides gritted their teeth and persevered. The Bloody Butcher hoped to break this final barrier and used the rapid sword formation to mince his opponent into pieces. Grim, on the other hand, gritted his teeth and increased the density and strength of the stream of fire in his hands, trying his best to fight for those precious 5 seconds for the Inferno Tyrant's terrifying attack. Sizzle, amidst the strange sounds of the flames shattering, the tip of the sword formation was less than half a meter away from Grim's fingertips. Chapter 302. Burning Pain. It was a simple fire elemental spell. The only special thing about it was that it could convert part of the fire damage into physical damage, which would be used on the target's mind. So it could also be seen as a mutated spell. However, when this simple mutated spell was activated by the Inferno Tyrant, it was given 160 degrees of dual elemental damage. So, at the center of the collision, the Bloody Butcher, who had turned into a sword formation, suddenly screamed, and his rapidly spinning body suddenly stopped. In the next second, the already stiff Bloody Butcher was engulfed by the sizzling scarlet flame torrent. Even Grim could not accurately determine how high the temperature at the center of the flames was. Anyway, in his elemental vision, it was already a sea of red. The extremely high temperature twisted and wrinkled the void, and the dense, distorted light and the blinding red light made it hard to look directly at it. Even the center of the red light could not be penetrated by Grim's spiritual perception. With a shrill howl like that of a wild beast, a tall figure rushed out of the scarlet flame torrent. The red flames were still exploding on the tall figure, but the core temperature was much lower than before, so Grim's spiritual power could penetrate it and see the Bloody Butcher's tragic situation. Yes, it was indeed tragic. The terrifying heat had melted almost half of the flesh on his body. Looking around, there was not a single piece of skin on his body that was undamaged. The Bloody Butcher's skin and flesh, which were half a centimeter thick, had been completely charred. As he walked forward step by step, the charred shell that had been shaken cracked inch by inch, revealing the fresh and tender flesh and the muscle fibers that were as tough as steel wire underneath. There was a huge depression in his abdomen which was shocking to see. Unable to withstand the destruction of Grim's flames, the Bloody Butcher's blood-red metal armor had already melted, turning into balls of golden molten iron that dripped on the ground. The rest had already melted with his skin and flesh, and it was difficult to tell them apart. The Bloody Butcher had rushed out with his arms raised high to protect his face, so his arms that had suffered the impact of the flames could not be seen at all. The melted gauntlets and arm guards gilded his white arm bones with a layer of gold. When he put down his skeleton-like golden arm, an even more sinister and terrifying face was revealed. The Bloody Butcher no longer had any facial skin, hair, or nose. His entire face, flesh, and skin had disappeared. Even his right eye had become a dark, bloody hole, and blood was slowly dripping out of it. At this moment, the Bloody Butcher was glaring at Grim with his remaining eye. The hatred and resentment in his eyes were so intense that it could melt one's soul. He gritted his white teeth so hard that they creaked. He looked like he wanted to devour Grim's flesh. Behind him, in the dark forest, 2 strangely dressed magi slowly walked out, one on the left and one on the right, hindering Grim's path of attack. Having lost the opportunity to kill the Bloody Butcher, Grim stopped in his tracks. The Inferno Tyrant's arms were raised high, and his entire body was wreathed in flames as he stood guard at his side. 1 against 3. The situation was obviously extremely disadvantageous for Grim. He quickly called out to Alice in his mind a few times, but he did not get any response. It was difficult to sense whether she was alive or dead through the simple soul contract. Grim's heart sank. However, the extreme anger and fear of death had also stimulated Grim's anger. The blood in his body gradually boiled, and the Inferno Demon's heart in his chest continuously beat a deep war drum. "You killed Alice?" Grim's voice was muffled and hoarse, as if he was trying his best to suppress his emotions. "You mean that pretty and cute little girl?" The Magus on the left pulled down his hood, revealing a hissing snake's head. She tasted good. This was a powerful bloodline magus. Even though Grimm's heart was filled with violent killing intent, facing a bloodline magus who was famous for his powerful combat abilities still made him shudder. In the sorcerer world, arcane magi were undoubtedly the weakest among the 4 major sorcerer systems. They were either good at making puppets, brewing potions, enchantment alchemy, or summoning from another world. No matter which one they chose, it would take up most of their time as a sorcerer if they wanted to reach a high level. With this burden, professional arcane magi were undoubtedly the weakest in terms of combat ability. Elemental magi and anatomy refinery magi were evenly matched, and each had their own advantages and disadvantages. Elemental magi had extremely high mental strength, so the elemental spells they activated were extremely powerful under the amplification of their mental strength. However, most elemental magi did not have a high physique, so their bodies became their weakest link. Anatomy refinery magi had already tempered their bodies into a kind of human-shaped sorcerer artifact, and every move they made had great power. However, most of their attacks were more focused on close-range physical attacks, so their fighting style was similar to that of warriors, rangers, and assassins in the otherworld. As for bloodline magi, their usual fighting style was similar to that of elemental magi, except that their bodies mastered fewer spells. However, once they successfully revealed the source of their bloodline, they could instantly transform into an ancient monster, combining the long-range attacks of elemental magi and the strong physique of anatomy refinery magi. Therefore, among the 4 major sorcerer systems in the sorcerer world, the most comprehensive and powerful were the bloodline magi. At least in a battle of the same level, bloodline magi were always the strongest and most oppressive. The magus on the right also pulled down her hood, revealing a beautiful woman's face. There was a diamond-shaped tarot diamond between her eyebrows, and under the moonlight, it emitted a hazy, illusory, dazzling light. He seemed to be an elemental magus who walked the path of illusion. The 2 magi who rushed over coldly looked at the miserable appearance of the bloody butcher. Although they looked like they did not care, the vigilance in their eyes gradually became stronger. Although the 2 who came later were confident that they had methods to restrain the bloody butcher, it seemed that Grimm's terrifying strength was not inferior to theirs in order to force him into such a miserable state. Therefore, it was rare that the 2 who came later did not pounce on Grimm and the Inferno Tyrant the moment they entered. Instead, they slowly circled around Grimm and the Inferno Tyrant. "Which one do you choose?" The snake-headed magus tilted his head and looked at the female illusionist. "You're the strongest, so of course you'll be the one to deal with Grimm. Leave this big elemental magus to me." The beautiful illusionist's smile was overflowing with charm. Even Grimm's heart skipped a beat when he saw it. "Humph, your enchantment and illusion spells are ineffective against elemental beings, right?" The snake-headed magus snorted in dissatisfaction. However, he was still very pleased with the other party's humble attitude. "Hee, I have you, my lord. I just need to stall this big guy for a while, and you'll naturally be able to deal with him by then. Will I still be in any danger?" The beautiful illusionist spoke casually, as if it was only natural. Humph! The snake-headed magus could not be bothered to bicker with this woman. He turned around and stared at Grimm. His strange amber-like vertical pupils were calm, and Grimm's figure was reflected within them. Grimm's gaze met with his, and he immediately felt his mind turn sluggish. Even his body felt a little uncomfortable. At the same time, the AI chip's ear-piercing alarm sounded in Grimm's mind. "Warning, warning. Detected invasion of a foreign force field. Host's body is partially damaged. Please indicate whether to disperse the energy." "I force?" Grimm was shocked. He felt a slight numbness in his body, and ordered without hesitation, "Disperse it immediately." "AI chip, can you determine the nature of the opponent's I-force?" "Beep. The foreign force field energy has been dispersed. Initial determination, Petrification. Eyes of petrification. Could this be the innate ability of the bloodline creature that the opponent had inherited? Eye chip, can you deduce the source of the opponent's bloodline? Grimm summoned a magma shield to cover the strange eyes of the enemy while he gave the order in his mind. With the snake-headed creature and the eyes of petrification, he should be able to obtain some information. Matching with the database, there are 11 types of ancient snake bloodlines that possess the eyes of petrification. The scales on the snake's head are small and dense, and the color is gray. Its eyes are amber with dark brown spots. Based on the characteristics, initial determination: black mamba snake, earth-type monster, probability of 66%. Giant serpent, branch of the ancient Medusa, probability of 27%. The other types have less than 1% probability, not showing for now. Show me the relevant information on the black mamba snake. Grimm was practically shouting as he communicated with the eye chip. In any case, mental communication was always the fastest. No matter how complicated the thoughts were, it would only take an instant for them to communicate. In the next second, all the information on the black mamba snake was projected in Grimm's mind. Although the information was not complete, it was enough to outline the terrifying and powerful nature of this ancient monster. The black mamba snake was an earth-type monster, the apex predator of ancient times. It was one of the most terrifying and dangerous species. It possessed powerful physical strength and terrifying spiritual force, and could use its eyes to channel the power of petrification into the bodies of other living beings. Innate abilities: eyes of petrification, rockfall hell. Just as Grimm was retreating, the snake-headed Magus's forked tongue flickered, and its entire body began to expand. In the blink of an eye, it had transformed from a humanoid Magus into a 10-meter-long, terrifying black snake with a body as thick as a water tank. The giant snake slowly raised its head, its terrifying vertical pupils staring at Grimm. Earth-yellow smoke rose from the ground, condensing into a rock armor with mysterious patterns on its body. After completing its battle preparations, the giant snake raised its body high up, its terrifying snake-like mouth slightly split open, revealing its white fangs and forked tongue. Fire Demon? What a great name! From today onwards, this name no longer exists. After hissing like a declaration of war, the giant snake suddenly pounced forward, opening its fangs and biting towards Grimm, whose body was covered in raging flames. Chapter 303. The multicolored light instantly illuminated the entire forest. When the light gradually faded, darkness once again enveloped the land. The Inferno Tyrant, whose entire body was wreathed in flames, had already disappeared without a trace. The female illusionist had also disappeared with him. Illusion? Sealing technique? Or was it some other strange thing? Grimm did not have time to think. He could only use Flame Leap to leave the place, and then reappeared in an empty space in the forest 100 meters away. A loud snapping sound rang out. The giant serpent that the bloodline sorcerer had transformed into closed its mouth, emitting a loud noise that shook the entire forest. Even the giant tree behind Grimm that needed 2 people to wrap their arms around was snapped in half by the serpent's bite. Then, in the midst of the flying sawdust, half of the giant tree fell down with a creaking sound, branches and leaves still on it. The loud rumbling sound was still echoing in the dark forest. The giant serpent's huge body was like a rampaging golem that had lost control. It smashed through the rows of giant trees that were blocking its way, and slithered towards Grimm at high speed. Along the way, grass flew everywhere, and mud billowed. Its momentum was enormous, and its power was ferocious. No one dared to imagine what would happen if they were to be hit head-on by such a huge monster. Grimm roared loudly as he looked at the huge shadow that was pressing towards him like an avalanche. He looked at the pair of strange amber eyes that were as bright as stars in the darkness. Endless abyssal flames gushed out from the flame demon's heart along with the surging flame energy, flowing through his veins and meridians rapidly throughout his body. Fierce flames surged around Grimm's body, and his body also began to expand rapidly. The skin on the surface of his body was torn apart by the violent force, causing his flesh to split open in an instant. His entire body was covered with cuts and bruises. However, the black and red lava that flowed out quickly filled up the gaps, turning his body into a flame demon's body made of flesh, flames, and lava in an instant. Two thick and sinister curved horns began to appear bit by bit. Grimm moved his body in pain, his huge hooves stomping heavily on the scorched ground. The terrifying heat instantly vaporized all the water in the soil. Scarlet magma gushed out from the ground and quickly converged. Soon, a large pool of magma was formed under Grimm's hooves. More lava and flames began to gather in Grimm's right hand, and in the blink of an eye, it had condensed into a gigantic and terrifying beheading sword. Scorching flames, scarlet lava, thick black smoke, and the choking smell of sulfur in the blink of an eye, a 5-meter-tall Balrog with flames and magma flowing over its body stood up in this terrifying world forged from red-black magma. Its body was filled with crimson magma, and the surface of its body was solidified magma. At the joints of its broad and sturdy torso, hideous and terrifying magma spikes could be seen clearly. Facing the ferociously pouncing black mamba snake, Grimm, who had transformed into a new type of Balrog, raised his neck and roared fiercely. Thick black smoke and lingering flames spurted out from his mouth and nostrils. The terrifying might was shocking. Die! After a short declaration of war, the two equally terrifying huge bodies collided with each other. Boom! A loud, dull sound echoed. Following that, a violent shock wave rippled out like ripples on water. All the giant trees, grass, and flames that were hit by the shock wave were crushed into powder and thrown away. The two gigantic bodies were tightly entwined with each other as they tumbled and bumped into each other as they charged into the distance. The black mamba snake raised its long neck and let out a long hiss of pain. Its body that was tightly wrapped around the Balrog's torso looked like it was wrapped around a scarlet magma pillar. The scales and flesh on its body looked like they were being roasted on fire, emitting thick black smoke. The snake's body was burnt red. Even so, it did not loosen its grip. Instead, it forcefully contracted its muscles, causing the Balrog's torso to creak. It coiled its body, and its huge snake head slithered in front of the Balrog's flaming head. The snake's eyes stared at the Balrog's eyes that were filled with raging flames. A khaki-colored petrifying power spread towards Grimm's spirit sea through the spiritual connection. If the Eye of Petrification was used carelessly, it would only petrify the opponent's outer shell. To paralyze the opponent's resistance, it would depend on the strength of the opponent's resistance. However, if the Eye of Petrification could directly enter the opponent's spirit sea through the spiritual connection, the opponent would instantly lose all ability to resist and become a fish on a chopping board. The Balrog Grimm, who was wrapped up in the Eye of Petrification, was not willing to sit still and wait for death. It reached out and grabbed the snake's neck, roaring madly as it urged the abyss fire in its body to burn the snake's body. At the same time, the power of flames surged up and shot out from its burning eyes. The khaki-colored Eye of Petrification and the dazzling scarlet sun fire collided fiercely between their eyes. The point of collision swayed in the air, moving in Grimm's direction and the giant snake wizard's direction. Every time it deviated slightly in a certain direction, it would cause one of them to roar madly, followed by a burst of force. The giant snake wizard and the Balrog wizard were entangled together, rolling and fighting in a sea of lava. The terrifying power of the Eye of Petrification was also fiercely clashing with each other. For a moment they were evenly matched. In a corner of the dark forest, the bloody butcher, who had been beaten miserably, gulped down large and small bottles of healing potions and recovery potions. He also used all kinds of witchcraft and treasures that could speed up the recovery of his flesh and blood. Unfortunately, as a physique refinement wizard, His body's potential had been excavated to the extreme, so most of the healing and stimulating potions had little effect on him. They were far less effective than other wizards. With great difficulty, he used his own blood pressure to extinguish the flames on his body. After a series of treatments, the Bloody Butcher's injuries stabilized. As the unbearable numbness and pain spread through his limbs and bones, the muscles on his body wriggled crazily to repair themselves. His condition was no longer as miserable and terrifying as it was before. The Bloody Butcher stood in the darkness while urging his blood pressure to quickly repair his damaged body. He used his only remaining eye to observe the battle in the distance. In the blink of an eye, the battle between the two sides had already covered a distance of 3 miles. Amidst the sea of flames and earth-shattering explosions, the two sides were locked in a fierce battle. It was a ghastly sight. The Bloody Butcher was secretly shocked as he watched the battle. If Grimm used this method right from the start of the battle, how long would he be able to last in the lava world of the terrifying Balrog? A quarter of an hour or half an hour? Not to mention Grimm's terrifying Balrog body after transforming, just the abyss fire and high-temperature flames surrounding his body would be enough to make him suffer. Although the Balrog was not famous for its strength, it still had 12 or 3 points of strength and a terrifyingly strong vitality. If he really had to fight such a terrifying opponent to the death, the Bloody Butcher felt that he would definitely become cannon fodder. Although the Bloody Butcher had 17 points of vitality and 14 points of strength, he was still considered an elite wizard among the Grade 1 wizards. However, he knew very well that even elite wizards were divided into different ranks. Elite wizards who had just crossed the threshold of 10 points in their basic stats were often called pseudo-elites. They might be able to unleash extraordinary abilities in some areas, but their overall coordination was not good, and they were not stable enough. Therefore, they could not be considered as real elite wizards. Only those who had all their basic stats above 10 points could be considered as real elite wizards. They were often the main force of the big families in foreign wars. Whether it was a planar war or a family war, they were always the ones who rushed to the front line. Seriously speaking, the Bloody Butcher was also one of these people. Although his vitality had exceeded the threshold of 15 points and reached 17 points, his strength, agility, and spiritual force were still lagging behind. Above him were the elite wizards who had all their basic stats above 15 points. They were usually the reserve power of the wizard families to break through to Grade 2 wizards. They were usually hidden and rarely appeared in the outside world. However, once such a person appeared, he would be able to crush regular elite magi in all aspects. Therefore, when he suddenly saw 2 wizards of this level fighting in front of him, the Bloody Butcher felt an indescribable shock and fear from his soul to his body. "What are you waiting for? Come and help me!" All of a sudden, a voice exploded in the Bloody Butcher's mind. Judging from the voice, it was the giant snake wizard who was fighting with his life on the line. The Bloody Butcher grinned ferociously as he looked at the 2 big guys who were fighting each other in the distance. He did not care that his movement had once again torn the muscles and tendons on his face that had just healed. Blood dripped down his cheeks again. The Bloody Butcher waved his hand, and the 2-handed sword that had been knocked away returned to his hand with a bloody glow. The Bloody Butcher let out a roar as he looked at the terrifying fire demon, who was entangled by the giant snake's body and couldn't move at all. His whole body was shrouded in a bloody aura, and he looked like a god that had descended from the heavens. The Balrog Grimm, who was in the middle of a fierce battle, felt the ground tremble slightly. His face, which was covered in flames, immediately turned serious. With a burst of strength, the Balrog created some space for his body to move. The Balrog took out 2 bright crystals from his body and threw them towards the Bloody Butcher, who was running towards him. With this little bit of mental relaxation, the Black Mamba snake took the opportunity to tighten its body again. Grimm's Balrog body made a cracking sound, and many large cracks appeared on his body. Chapter 304. Damn it, hold on! Grim roared madly. The Fire Lord's heart, which had been completely unsealed, began to beat rapidly in his broad and strong chest. The fire energy that was gushing out surged and circulated in his body, providing him with a steady stream of powerful energy. The balance of the battle that had been slightly out of balance was once again turned around by Grim. Not far from them, the two bright crystals that Grim had thrown out had just landed on the ground, and two terrifying demonic puppets with different appearances and abilities rose from the ground. The Rotting One and the Howling One. The Rotting One looked like a slime monster covered in green mucus. Its body was overflowing with a strange green fluorescence, and wherever it passed, the plants would wither and die, leaving behind a sticky, slippery, and poisonous path. The Howling One was a 5-meter-tall giant made of stone. When it charged forward with heavy footsteps that shook the earth, the whole ground trembled, making it difficult for people to stand straight. Normally, with Grim's strength, after releasing the Inferno Tyrant, his remaining spiritual force would not be enough to support the Rotting One and the Howling One. This was the first time that 3 wizard-level demonic puppets had appeared on the battlefield at the same time. In the past, when he encountered a big battle, the Inferno Tyrant alone was enough to control the situation. Normal small fights could be easily settled by Grim himself. Therefore, the 2 wizard-level demonic puppets, who were not as strong as him, had never had the chance to fight in the battlefield since they were born. However, today, the new Balrog transformation had increased Grim's spiritual force, and his basic stats were all in red. Apart from his agility, all his other stats had rushed up to 15 points. Therefore, while he was supporting the Inferno Tyrant with all his strength, he also released the 2 secondary demonic puppets, the Rotting One and the Howling One. Facing the 2 wizard-level demonic puppets coming at him from the left and right, the Bloody Butcher was also on the verge of a mental breakdown. If he was in perfect condition, he would be able to take down these stupid elemental puppets, whose strength was only comparable to a newly advanced sorcerer, no matter how many of them there were. But if it was now before he could get close to the Bloody Butcher, the Rotted One's slowly moving body suddenly shook, and a beam of green light shot toward the Bloody Butcher. At the same time, the giant stone golem that was striding forward suddenly threw a millstone-sized boulder at the Bloody Butcher's head. Damn, 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 and while cursing, the Bloody Butcher quickly waved his sword in both of his hands. 2 streams of blood-red chi flew out of the sword and shattered his opponent's attack. The stinky acidic venom was wrapped by the blood-colored energy and quickly covered the ground within a 50-meter radius. The forest, which had already been ravaged to the point where there wasn't an inch of skin left unscathed, was once again trampled by the terrifying soft feet. When the remaining grass and trees came into contact with the acid, they immediately let out sizzling sounds of corrosion. A strange, pungent smell filled the forest in an instant. The boulder that had exploded in midair was instantly smashed into thousands of pieces, flying in all directions. The stones that were filled with powerful energy were no weaker than arrows fired at close range. Wherever they hit, there would be obvious holes. Under normal circumstances, this kind of attack would not even be able to pass through the Bloody Butcher's protective blood aura. But now, when the blows landed on his wounds that were still healing quickly, he let out a muffled groan, suffering unspeakable pain. Not to mention helping the giant snake sorcerer, even he himself was pushed back by the 2 magi puppets. He barely managed to hold on with the sword in his hand. Although Grim could not split his attention to command the 2 magi puppets, the AI chip could do it easily. Under the AI chip's command, the Howlers rushed forward and acted as a meat shield, while the Rotted One hid behind and constantly shot arrows. The Bloody Butcher, who had lost a lot of his strength, could only use guerrilla tactics to barely deal with them. After releasing the Magi puppets to stabilize the situation, Grim immediately focused on fighting the Black Mamba snake. If the Black Mamba was a genuine ancient snake monster, Grim would have run as far away as he could, not wanting to tangle with it any longer. After all, in all the books, snake-type monsters were known for their stamina, and were good at grinding their enemies to death. But now, the one fighting Grimm was only a giant snake sorcerer's bloodline transformation. Like Grimm's Balrog transformation, there was a time limit. Moreover, the more intense the battle, the more bloodline energy would be consumed, and the shorter the duration of the bloodline transformation. Under normal circumstances, Grimm's magic rune transformation would definitely take far less time than his opponent's bloodline transformation. But now, with the Balrog's heart continuously supplying pure fire energy, the consumption of maintaining the Balrog transformation was much lower. Hence, he had the capital to fight the enemy head-on, using brute force to defeat the enemy. As a Balrog famous for its violent fire energy, Grimm also wanted to run far away with a flame leap and blast the enemy into pieces with a thunder smoke cannon. However, he had released 3 wizard-rank magic puppets, and one of them was the Inferno Tyrant that was not inferior to an elite wizard. More than 80% of Grimm's power of the will had been used up. The remaining power of the will was barely enough to support a flame barrier, desperately roasting the snake's body. As for other spells, he was sorry. Even if he could free up his hands, he would not be able to use them. Of course, there were still 6 large-scale spells hidden in the secret voodoo scroll in the Balrog body that he could use for free. But in the current situation, he really could not free up his hands. Grimm's Balrog transformation grabbed the black mamba snake's long neck with a pair of giant flaming hands, barely pulling it away. Only then did he not let the snake bite him with its terrifying fangs. The battle between the Eyes of Petrification and the Burning Eye continued, causing both sides to overflow with uncontrollable damage. A large area of dark spots appeared on Grimm's Balrog body that was surrounded by flames. A thin layer of stone spread over his body, repeatedly fighting with the power of the flames for control of his body. As for the black mamba giant snake, it was almost cooked. A strong smell of meat wafted over the battlefield, mixed with a strong burnt stench. Clusters of crimson flames danced on the giant snake's body, faintly spreading into a large area. On its long neck, the scorch marks left by the flaming sun rays crisscrossed, looking extremely miserable. At this moment, the giant snake wizard's heart was full of hatred. In the 100 years he had spent in the scattered tower forest, every time he transformed into the terrifying black mamba snake, it was the best time for him to dominate the battlefield. Fine gray snake scales covered its entire body from head to toe, not leaving a single inch of its body unprotected. These snake scales were as hard as enchanted giant tower shields, and they also had indescribable magic resistance. Therefore, after transforming, the black mamba snake was simply a bulldozer covered in thick armor. It could use its powerful strength, long life, and super strong defense to crush all enemies into pieces. The bloodline of the black mamba snake was not without flaws. However, its flaws were not something that anyone could grasp. Without a strong physique that could resist the giant snake's charge, entanglement, and petrification, even if one knew its flaws, it would be difficult to make use of them, let alone defeat it. Therefore, for a period of time, as the giant snake wizard, he had become a headache for almost all elite wizards. But what he didn't expect was that today, in this extremely simple assassination mission, he would actually encounter a guy who was strong enough to fight against his giant snake transformation. And the other party. In the information, the other party was actually labeled as a newly advanced wizard. While entangling with the terrifying Balrog, the giant snake wizard had the urge to tear the person who introduced the mission into pieces countless times. Damn it, was there a newly advanced wizard in the world with such strength? Many times, the giant serpent Magus even suspected that someone was plotting against him, purposely pushing him into such a difficult situation. If he could, the giant snake wizard would have long wanted to leave this battlefield. However, before the battle started, The wrong information had led him to mistakenly believe that it would be a simple one-sided battle. That was why he dashed over so boldly, trying to rely on his physical strength to crush the enemy and quickly kill him. But when the two sides were entangled together, he painfully discovered that it was extremely difficult for him to break away from it. Both sides were tightly entangled together, using strength to resist. If either side were to slack off, it would trigger a crazy counterattack from the other party. If he were to relax even a little, the giant flame claws that were tightly gripping his neck would break through and tear his snake body apart. The other party's terrifying flames would also mercilessly enter his body, completely turning him into a dead snake that was roasted from the inside out. There were countless times in the past when the giant snake wizard wanted to give up his pointless pride and dignity and take the initiative to reconcile with the other party. After all, it was just a meaningless hunting mission. After all, there was no real enmity between him and the other party. After all, however, just as countless thoughts lingered in the giant snake wizard's mind, there was a flicker of light and shadow in the distant void. Two figures, one tall and one short, appeared in the field again. The tall flame body was, of course, the Inferno Tyrant who was sealed in the illusory barrier, and the short one was, of course, the beautiful illusionist with a voluptuous figure. The battle with the Inferno Tyrant in the dimensional space was obviously not going well. After all, the elemental demon mantis was not susceptible to any charm or illusory effects. Therefore, as soon as they flew out of the dimensional space, the beautiful illusionist shouted with a sharp and ear-piercing voice, "Did the two of you finish the target? Hurry up and help." Her words came to an abrupt halt. Looking around, the scene in the field caused her beautiful eyes to widen. She almost could not believe her own eyes. "What are you doing? Why are you fighting like this?" In the depths of the forest in the distance, a 10-meter-long terrifying giant snake coiled around the body of a 5-meter-tall giant inferno demon. Both sides were rolling and fighting in the continuous sea of fire and pool of lava. Every strike could be said to be earth-shattering, and could trigger terrifying elemental waves that were like the roar of mountains and the roar of tsunamis. If this side was still considered to be evenly matched, then the other side was a little too tragic to look at. A strange demon mantis that looked like a green sludge monster cooperated with a tall stone person and was chasing that bloody butcher all over the world. Meanwhile, the latter was covered in cuts and bruises from the strange sorcery of the first two. His body was covered in green and purple patches, and he was even limping. His entire appearance was beyond miserable. And just as the beautiful illusionist was stunned on the spot, the Inferno Tyrant, who had broken free from the entanglement of the illusory spell, roared and raised his hands high. A large-scale fire sorcery was about to be released in an instant. Chapter 305. A sharp female voice that could pierce through metal and stone suddenly sounded in the field, giving everyone in the battle a fright. Immediately after, a terrifying flaming storm erupted in the forest. The Inferno Tyrant, who had suffered enough from illusions in the illusory boundary, gave up on single-target spells that were easily misled by the opponent. Once he received the AI chip's guidance, he immediately released a big move. A terrifying flaming storm that covered an area of half a mile. The numerous mirror images that the female illusionist had just manifested did not even have the chance to display their bewitching effects before they were engulfed by the sweeping wave of flames. And within the crimson wave, an egg-shaped energy barrier appeared. Thus, in the next second, the Inferno Tyrant raised his hands high, and a slightly smaller area of effect spell, Meteor Rain, formed above the egg-shaped energy barrier. Under the guidance of the Inferno Tyrant, fiery meteors with black and red tails were like precisely guided bombs, constantly landing on the energy barrier. Every collision and explosion would bring about dense and violent ripples. Under someone's command, the energy barrier dashed left and right in the sea of flames and meteor rain, trying to break free. Unfortunately, under the continuous guidance of the Inferno Tyrant, it would be brought back into the attack range again. One continued to escape, and the other continued to chase. Both parties played a game of cat and mouse in the field. And everywhere they passed, flames roared and explosions occurred one after another. The entire forest instantly turned into a sea of flames. Illusionists did not specialize in battle strength, but were a fringe auxiliary profession. For magi who lacked spiritual defense methods, illusionists were undoubtedly a very terrifying opponent. Often, they would fall for their tricks without even knowing where the other party's true body was. But facing an elemental magic puppet that was not charmed by gods at all, many of the techniques of an illusionist could not be used at all. And the fire elemental spells that the opponent activated were all strangely powerful and had shocking effects. Thus, apart from constantly misdirecting the opponent's attack direction, she actually could not come up with any decent methods to counterattack. But fire elemental spells were just that detestable. Even if she could not hit the opponent in 1 or 2 strikes, the sea of flames that spread after the frenzied bombardment could also slowly compress the opponent's space to maneuver. Not long after, the entire field was turned into a sea of flames. At this time, the enemy had nowhere to run. The dense, egg-shaped energy membrane was propped up outside his body, on which strange runes and dazzling lights were flowing all the time. Misdirection, awareness evasion, light refraction, concealment. All kinds of illusions with different effects were used, constantly leading the enemy's attacks to a certain area in the surroundings. But even so, the aftermath of the violent fire spells still made it hard for her to hold on. Many times, she even had to summon wind particles to make her footsteps lighter and faster in order to avoid the terrifying sea of fire that was everywhere. She was trying her best to hold on. There was still hope for the battle. As long as the most powerful giant serpent wizard could kill the target, the summoned elemental puppets would disappear in an instant. Then, they would be able to complete the mission and obtain the item they had been dreaming of for a long time. Therefore, for the sake of an illusory thought, she still tried her best to persevere. Even if the corner of her robe had been ignited by the sea of fire, she still persisted, however, at this moment, in the core battlefield where she had placed all her hopes. The battle was cruel and intense. The close combat between the terrifying giant serpent and the tall Balrog had also reached a critical juncture. After a long and torturous battle, the strength and physique of both sides had declined, especially their bodies, which had endured extremely terrifying devastation. Both sides were entangled together. The long and thick body of the giant serpent coiled around the Balrog's body, and as the other party struggled with all its strength, the serpent's body had already been pulled longer and thinner, and the violent flames and high-temperature flames that were everywhere were constantly roasting its body. Nearly 40% of the serpent's body had been roasted, and the thick burnt smell was nauseating. But even so, the black mamba serpent was still attacking with all its might. The pitch-black serpent's mouth was constantly spewing poisonous mist, and its eyes of petrification were constantly shooting out rays of petrification. As long as the Balrog's body was grazed, the raging flames would instantly solidify into a gray stone shell, and then it would be crushed into powder in the crazy struggle between the two people. The giant serpent wanted to bite the Balrog countless times, hoping to inject the poison directly into the other party's body and further paralyze the other party's resistance. But the Balrog that Grimm had transformed into reached out with both hands and tightly gripped the long neck of the giant serpent, causing it to fail again and again. And the long tail behind the giant serpent was more like a thick whip, taking advantage of the fact that the Balrog's body was tied up and unable to move, desperately lashing at the broad and strong body of the Balrog. Every blow from the tail would produce fine cracks like a spider web on the Balrog's body. Terrifying flames and high-temperature flames spewed out from the cracks, causing the giant serpent to hiss from the heat. All the serpent's body that was hit by the flames was instantly scorched black, and the flesh inside was instantly charred, losing its vitality. This was the purest form of flame energy, and the Balrog's counterattack was equally sharp and terrifying. A pair of flaming hands tightly gripping the long neck of the giant serpent gathered an immeasurable amount of flame energy, and the extremely high temperature burned the giant serpent's body, causing it to writhe in pain. In a burst of sizzling sounds and thick black smoke, the pair of flaming hands had already sunk deep into the scales and flesh of the giant serpent, and the strange aroma of roasted snake meat filled the air. And the flaming rays from the Balrog's burning eyes sizzled as they streaked across the serpent's body, each time leaving deep and black burn marks on the tough gray scales. The abyssal flames that lingered on the Balrog's body were the greatest enemy of the giant serpent. The ever-present crimson flames made it feel as if it was in a volcano of molten lava. After transforming into the black mamba serpent, its magic resistance had indeed risen to a height that ordinary people could not hope to reach, but it still could not reach the level of immunity to fire. Moreover, the abyssal flames in its body were far more sinister and vicious than elemental flames. Not only could it burn flesh, but it could also corrode the vitality of the enemy's soul. This last point was even more terrifying and difficult to deal with than the first point. Therefore, when the battle had gone on for half an hour, the giant serpent's distorted and ugly face suddenly showed a look of panic and unease. The power of the bloodline in its body had begun to fade. As a bloodline magus, the power of the bloodline in their body was not endless, but it needed a long period of nourishment and accumulation to support the manifestation of the source of their bloodline. During a battle, the bloodline transformation could instantly allow them to possess the terrifying physical strength and innate spells of some ancient monsters and monsters. But this consumed the power of their bloodline that they had accumulated. A short period of bloodline transformation was enough to allow them to have a super strong combat power that could crush enemies of the same level, and there were very few situations where the power of the bloodline could not be sustained. But today, sorry to say, the continuous transformation and high-intensity battle for half an hour had made the giant serpent magus exhausted, and the power of the bloodline in its body had begun to decline rapidly. Therefore, in the midst of the intense battle, the black mamba serpent suddenly let out a long hiss, and its body began to rapidly shrink and degenerate. In the blink of an eye, it was beaten back to its human form. Having lost the protection of the tough snake scales, and having lost its strong physique and strength, the berserk abyssal flames immediately entangled the giant serpent magus body, causing it to hiss in pain. Its body flashed like lightning, and it planned to quickly escape from the battlefield. Unfortunately, the flame devil that Grim had transformed into would not let it get what it wanted. Following the flame devil's roar, pillars of lava rose from the periphery in a ring shape. Following that, the violent and ferocious flow of flames crisscrossed, and very quickly, with the lava pillars as the framework, it weaved into a flame cage. The giant serpent magus' fleeing body crashed into the dense and tough fire net, and it immediately bounced back with a sizzling sound. Grim opened his hand, and a large lava hand wrapped in crimson flames grabbed the giant serpent magus, and the terrifying abyssal flames immediately engulfed the giant serpent magus body. The giant serpent sorcerer, whose body was grabbed by the Balrog, screamed miserably as he was burned by the raging flames. The petrification rays in his eyes immediately shot out in all directions, trying to force the Balrog back. How could Grim let go of such a good opportunity? His large hand exerted some force, and the bones in the giant serpent magus body began to creak. While the giant serpent magus was in so much pain, Grim's two sharp claws made of lava suddenly pierced into the giant serpent magus eye sockets, and then flicked. Following the giant serpent magus' heart-wrenching cry of pain, the two amber eyes of petrification were dug out like the most sparkling magical gems, and were immediately put into Grim's bag. Its power continued to decline. The giant serpent magus, who had exhausted the power of his bloodline, had already lost the ability to resist. His body was instantly crushed by Grimm, and all the items that contained magical waves were taken away. As for the giant serpent Magus head that had lost its eyes of petrification, Grimm kept it. Whether he could find the giant serpent Magus' identity and background in the future, it all depended on this head. The giant serpent Magus' tragic death had obviously shocked the other two magi. These two fellows, who had been at a disadvantage all this while, saw that the situation was not good, and immediately fled for their lives. The female illusionist was indeed an expert in concealment. She gritted her teeth and endured the Inferno Tyrant's exploding fireball. Then, she forcefully endured the pain of being burned, and rushed out of the battlefield with the help of the flame shock wave, quickly disappearing into the dark forest. Chapter 306. Grimm simply cleaned up the battlefield and summoned the Inferno Tyrant back to his side to protect himself. He then kept the Rotting One and the Roaring One before he exited his flame demon form. As soon as he returned to his human form, Grimm cried out in pain and knelt on the ground. His entire body was surrounded by a thick and evil aura of the abyss. Grimm had also paid a heavy price in the fierce battle just now. The abyssal flames from the flame demon's heart that had been unsealed in advance had seriously invaded and infected his body. If he did not find a way to expel this aura as soon as possible, it was very likely that he would mutate into a demonic creature from the lower realm. However, Grimm could not leave at this moment. He forcefully endured the pain and once again used his strong willpower to force the flame energy in his body into the flame demon's heart, then decisively sealed it again. If he transformed into a flame demon, the flame energy that spewed out from the flame demon's heart would be a great supplement. However, once he returned to his human form, the flame energy was too violent and difficult to control. If Grimm's body had not been elementalized, he would probably have been burned to death by the flame energy in his body. Grimm knelt on the scorched ground in pain and stretched out a trembling finger. Bright red flames immediately ignited at the tip of his finger. Grimm drew a line in the air, and the flames left twisted and strange scorch marks in the air. Every time a flame rune was completed, it would naturally absorb the fire elemental particles in the surrounding air and then burn. As soon as the flame rune appeared, it would be strangely swallowed by the flame demon's heart. With every flame rune swallowed, the abyssal aura on Grimm's body would weaken a little. However, no matter how hard he tried, the evil aura that was deeply immersed in his blood was still difficult to get rid of. It seemed that such a simple and crude method would not be able to get rid of the source of the abyssal aura. He could only try to find some suitable resources in the Magus Tower. Grimm struggled to stand up and suddenly raised his hand to point in a direction. "Bring me there to have a look." As the order was given, the Inferno Tyrant bent down and reached out to grab him, then took large strides and ran in the direction he pointed. In the deep and gloomy dark forest, a tall flame figure was striding forward. Its body was even taller than those towering ancient trees, and wherever it passed, the trees were set ablaze, and the earth was burning. The raging flames turned everything into ashes, leaving behind a charred path of ashes. In this stretch of darkness, the Inferno Tyrant's surging power and terrifying aura that could overwhelm everything were as eye-catching as this flaming corridor. Everyone who sensed its aura, regardless of whether they were birds or beasts, fled as fast as they could. The whole forest was in a mess. Countless birds and beasts rushed out of their nests and fled into the distance without looking back. For a moment, the forest was filled with birds and beasts. It was so chaotic that it seemed like the end of the world. The Inferno Tyrant completely disregarded these weak and small life forms, minding his own business as he pushed aside the ancient trees that were blocking his way and trudged through the forest step by step. Finally, in a dense forest 11 miles northwest of the battlefield, the Inferno Tyrant stopped in his tracks. Following the spread of a large area of the flame ring, the previously impenetrable forest had already been burned into a sea of fire. And in the sea of fire, a human-shaped boulder suddenly attracted Grimm's attention. Grimm controlled the Inferno Tyrant to grab the boulder, and with a sweep of his elemental vision, he saw Alice's familiar face on the golem's gray face. But fortunately, although Alice's aura was weak, she was not really dead after all. In the golem's body, a strange energy aura surged out continuously, protecting her internal organs from being completely petrified. Otherwise, with her apprentice-level vitality, she would not have been able to hold on until Grimm arrived to save her. It was that void stone. He really did not expect Alice to seal that void stone into her body in order to quickly increase her own strength. Although this would cause continuous damage to her body, it had also accidentally saved his little life. Just as Grimm was plotting how to save Alice, at the bottom of a cliff not far away, a piece of gray rock suddenly peeled off. Then, the goblin cabbie threw off the gray cloak that covered his body, and frantically ran to the Inferno Tyrant's side. "Master, master! It's great to see that you're safe and sound." Cabbie saw Alice's stone statue in the Inferno Tyrant's hands, and his small green bean-like eyes blinked, and actually squeezed out 2 drops of tears. "It's a pity. Lady Alice is, speaking of the heartache," Cabbie actually bawled loudly. "All right, wait until she's really dead before you mourn." The blood in Grimm's body was boiling, and Alice was anxiously waiting for treatment, so he did not have the time to waste with him. "Alice is still alive, we need to leave quickly." After saying that, without waiting for Cabbie to react, the Inferno Tyrant grabbed him, turned around, and ran wildly in the direction of Fedinin City. Lord Fire Demon had returned again. Moreover, it was said that he had also brought back the heads of 2 magi this time. Rumors spread rapidly in Fedinin City, and every sorcerer apprentice belonging to the Solubo family was excitedly passing on different versions of news and rumors with shining eyes. According to their descriptions, this newly promoted wizard Grimm had become the strongest among all the magi in the family, and his limelight had even completely overshadowed wizard Kogan, who had always been the leader of the official magi. Following the return of the fire demon, the magi of the Solubo family also began to become active. There were even rumors that the Solubo family seemed to be secretly preparing to start a war with some hostile forces. This was undoubtedly the topic that the surrounding families and magi organizations were most concerned about and most interested in. Therefore, in a short period of time, many people with ulterior motives swarmed into Fedinin City, inquiring about the movements of the Solubo family. Fedinin City, Magus Tower. In a secret room on the 12th floor, a lazy and bored Sinazar was reclining on a spacious stone bed. A thick green mist covered her body, making it difficult for others to see her appearance. Wizard Kogan, who was in charge of the daily affairs of the family, bowed and stood on the right side, reporting the recent movements of the family in detail. After Grimm borrowed a batch of resources such as sea agate, green-headed ginseng, water of ASU, and other resources from the family warehouse, he never came out of his residence. The Alice he brought back is still receiving treatment at Wizard Felicia's place. The power of petrification has already penetrated into her lungs, and it's quite troublesome to get rid of it. What about the 2 heads he brought back? Did you find out where they came from? Sinazar changed her posture and picked up a large piece of ground fire dragon meat from a huge tray in front of her with her fingertips. It was at least 10 kilograms of ground fire dragon meat, and she began to chomp on it in the green mist. This kind of fire dragon with the ability to spit out sulfur and poisonous fire could only be found in some volcanic areas. Their flesh was sour and tough, and it was comparable to leather armor tanned with the skin of an armored rhinoceros. It was also highly toxic, and was not suitable for humans to eat. However, ground fire dragons were still a type of drakes. Long-term consumption of them could still nourish the power of the drake's bloodline. Therefore, it became a snack for the rank 3 wizard Sinazar, and she would eat 1 or 2 from time to time. In the Fedinan City Wizard Tower's mission list, there was a long-term mission to purchase ground fire dragon meat. After hearing Master Senazar's question, Wizard Kogan bowed even lower. The origins of the two heads have been investigated. The giant serpent wizard was called Sark, and he came from the Seaman family in the Rashia region. It was a famous wizard family with the bloodline of a mutated snake monster. Their strength was ranked around 130, and they were an intermediate wizard family. The head of the family, Debas, had the strength of a rank 3 wizard, and after transforming, he had the strength of a rank 4 wizard. According to our investigation, it was not the family's idea to kill Grim, but this wizard Sark secretly accepted the mission. I've already talked to the old guys from the Talon Association. They approved the evidence we submitted, and they allowed us to take revenge on the Seaman family, or make them pay a high price to end this matter. The Bloody Butcher doesn't have any family backing him, and he's just a wandering wizard. I heard that he appeared in Moda City a while ago, but we haven't found any direct evidence of his relationship with the Black Hand Association. We also have some clues about the female illusionist who escaped. However, there must be some powerful force supporting him. Recently, we haven't been able to get any results from their divination. It seems like all divination spells have been blocked by them. The crunching sound in the green mist was getting clearer and clearer. It seems like these people are well prepared. If they successfully kill Grim, I'm afraid the fortune teller we hired won't even be able to find a single strand of hair of the enemy. Senazar ordered with dissatisfaction, send a message to the Seaman family. If they can't pay enough compensation, I don't mind eating a few of their core members. Also, do you know how Grim defeated them? No. Ko Gen shook his head helplessly. The battlefield was covered up by the other party. I can't see anything with divination spells. I've sent people to check the battlefield. It seems what? It seems like Grim defeated Sark with his own strength. You mean, Grim defeated an elite wizard and 2 veteran wizards by himself? Does he have the ability to do that? Maybe. Wizard Ko Gen frowned and explained to the elder who usually didn't care about the family business. He seems to have a strange ability to control elemental puppets. Whether it's the number or the quality, he's way better than those puppet masters. Elemental puppets? Senazar couldn't help but sneer. It seems like the next time someone tries to kill that kid, they'll have to hire a bunch of sealing masters. A bunch of trash. 3 wizards who have lived for 300 to 400 years couldn't even defeat a new wizard. What a quick death. Wizard Ko Gen shook his head with a bitter smile. He didn't dare to reply. Go and tell that kid Grim that the family is on his side in this matter. Those who should fight back will fight back, and those who should fight back will fight back. Kill anyone who dares to test the Sarubo family. The family would split the profits with him, and the 4 families would get 60% of the profit. I'll take care of all the rank 2 and above wizards for him. Let him do whatever he wants. Chapter 307. South Felder City Wizard Tower. In a secret magic room shrouded in mist, a small elemental fire pool was bubbling with hot steam. Grim was quietly soaking in it, meditating with his eyes closed. There was no natural volcanic magma pool in the wizard tower for him to cultivate in. The pool in front of him, which was 7 meters long, 5 meters wide, and 1 meter deep, gathered a huge amount of fire elements, which were also extracted from the energy room at the bottom. To maintain the existence of this elemental fire pool for a long time, 17% of the elemental energy that the wizard tower could gather every day would be consumed. If the elemental energy had to be purified into pure fire element, then this small pool would take up 31% of the wizard tower's daily energy reserves. If converted into magic crystals, it would be around 120 magic crystals per day. This was enough to hire a quasi-wizard to accompany you on a jungle adventure, but here it was only to create a more comfortable environment for Grim to cultivate in. Grim gently scooped up the boiling red lava and splashed it onto his chest. He then felt the warmth left behind by the lava as it slowly slid down his chest. The heat from the lava seeped through his skin and pores, entering his body and mind bit by bit, making him feel extremely relaxed and satisfied. The boiling crimson lava was naturally not real lava, but liquid fire formed when the fire element was concentrated to a certain degree. It was not as thick and sticky as natural lava, but it was pure enough. His dark red long hair was scattered behind him. Even though one end of it was in the red lava, there were no signs of it being burnt. Instead, wisps of dark red light would be released from the lava, which were slowly absorbed by his hair. After absorbing enough fire element, Grim's dark red hair became even more lustrous. As the light flickered, it was filled with a strange and evil aura. As Grim meditated, a large amount of fire element rushed into his body, frantically cleansing every meridian, every bone, every tendon, every trace of flesh. The dense fire element energy occupied every inch of space in his body, forcing the evil aura of the abyss to have nowhere to hide. It could only turn into wisps of black smoke and slowly melt in the air. As the intestine of the world, the abyss world in the lower world had always been a terrifying place. There were countless demons there. They were brutal, bloody, twisted, evil, and chaotic. You could add all the negative words to the demons, and they would never be wronged. These huge monsters had terrifying power. They were addicted to killing and were addicted to the pleasure of destruction and destruction. What was even more terrifying was that the twisted evil minds of the abyss world made them feel no guilt for killing and destroying. Other evil races in the multiverse might kill for survival, territory, resources, and dignity, but these demons did it purely for evolution. Most of the time, they even killed for entertainment or simply for killing. That was why the heart of the flame demon that Grim had transplanted was inevitably mixed with too much ugly, evil, and chaotic energy of the abyss. While Grim was coveting the powerful power and endless flame energy that the flame demon's heart could bring him, the will of the abyss also sent a trace of its own aura into Grim's mind through the flame demon's heart. To be honest, it was a fair deal. Grim got a powerful heart that could support the transformation of the flame demon, but he lost the part of his heart that was related to humanity. However, the process was gradual and slow. Although the invasion of the abyss was inevitable, it could still sharpen his will. As a wizard with profound knowledge and a wise mind, Grim preferred to have everything under his control. That was why in the few days after returning to Fedinin City, he almost did not go out and soaked in the elemental fire pool, trying to wash away the influence of the abyss aura. Wizards were powerful because of their accumulation of knowledge and intelligence. Once they were infected by the abyss aura and turned into a madman who only knew how to kill, they would be useless. As long as Grim was not stupid, he would not allow himself to fall into the abyss world. After completing one round of meditation, Grim's mental power had just left the meditation space when he sensed a message. He reached out and flicked a red rune into the control hub in the middle of the secret room. The door of the secret room opened. Even though the door to the secret room was open, a layer of dense red light blocked the heat from leaking out. It was Amu, a senior apprentice. He was holding a metal tray made entirely of magic iron alloy, which was filled with bottles of different sizes, colors, and shape. Amu also had an affinity with the fire element, so he was like a fish in water. Every pore on his body was opened to the maximum, breathing in the dense fire element with all his might. However, in order to protect his clothes from being ignited by the terrifying heat, Amu could only put up a layer of protection to block most of the fire element outside. Even with Amu's strength as a senior apprentice, he did not dare to go any further than 10 steps away from the elemental fire pool. He could see very clearly that a meter in front of him, the terrifyingly high temperature had already caused the air there to become blurred and distorted. Traces of strange red light drifted slowly in the air. It seemed harmless, but the temperature of the core had already reached a frightening 3,000 degrees Celsius. At this temperature, even if one was wearing an enchanted armor, one would be instantly roasted to a crisp. Amidst the gurgling sound of water, half of Grimm's body was immersed in the red elemental fire pool, and he was constantly stirring the lava on his body. With each of his movements, the temperature of the steam rising became even higher. Even if he did not deliberately use a flame barrier, the elemental fire pool had already formed a natural high-temperature barrier. Mu raised his head and looked enviously at Grimm, who was playing with the fire, and swallowed his saliva silently. Although he also had an affinity with the fire element, if he was thrown into the elemental fire pool, he would instantly be vaporized by the terrifying heat. In fact, only magi with an elemental body could enjoy the joy of bathing in the elemental fire pool. But to others it was no less than murder. Master, this is the potion sent by Wizard Felicia. In order to get rid of the remnants of the abyss aura in his body, Grimm could only ask for help from Felicia, who was a potion master. He would have to endure such torturous days for another half a month. How's Alice? Who's taking care of her? Grimm asked. It's Lena. According to her, the petrifying energy in Alice's body has been mostly dispersed, and she's now recuperating at Wizard Felicia's place. She should be able to get out of bed and walk in 5 days. Amu replied respectfully. Grimm grunted in response, but did not say anything else. In his mind, he received a message from Kogan. The two conversed through the spiritual channel for a while. After cutting off the spiritual channel, Grimm rested his arms on the edge of the pool and laid down in it. He could not help but think to himself, counterattack? Distribution of benefits? Looks like Lord Senazar has given me permission to reap some benefits from this. Anyway, I'll have to form my own faction sooner or later and build my own Magus Tower outside. I'll take this opportunity. Fandle City. This was a bustling city in the Rathi region that belonged to the Seaman family. Willock Castle, 3 miles west of the city, was the private residence of Magus Sark of the Seaman family. Usually, this was the place that all the noble ladies in the small city of Fandle liked to visit the most. Every night, the entire castle would be brightly lit, and luxurious carriages would gather in the square in front of the gate. All the nobles who thought they had some status would take pride in being invited by Magus Sark and spend the night drinking and partying here. However, with the news of Magus Sark's death, this place suddenly became deserted. The castle's gates, which were never closed, were now tightly locked. Close to 100 servants, attendants, butlers, and guards were all hiding in their rooms, waiting anxiously for their fates to come. In one of the bedrooms of the castle's 3 stories, a young man and a young woman were having a nervous conversation. Celia, you have to leave now. The young man was dressed in a noble's attire. His face was filled with anxiety as he paced back and forth in the room. We can't wait for anyone from the family to come. Grandpa Sark is already dead. As his direct descendants, we will definitely be implicated. The young man suddenly stopped in front of the girl and grabbed her shoulders, gently shaking her. Wake up! I heard that the family no longer plans to help Grandpa Sark get revenge. Instead, they want to hand us over to settle this matter. If you don't want to become a slave, you have to leave this place quickly. It can't be. It can't be. The one who spoke was a delicate and pretty girl. At this moment, her eyebrows were deeply furrowed, and her face was filled with panic and confusion. On both sides of her face, there were some faint gray spots near her parotid glands. If a Magus from the Seaman family was here, they would definitely be able to tell that this girl had awakened the giant serpent bloodline. As her body grew, when the density of her bloodline reached a point where it could support the awakening of her innate talent, her head would gradually evolve into the eye-catching head of a giant serpent Magus. However, the girl was already 15 or 16 years old, and she was only showing signs of awakening her bloodline now. In the Seaman family, she was already considered to be one of those with low potential in terms of bloodline talent. Even so, the awakening of her bloodline still gave her strength no weaker than that of a high-ranking acolyte. However, compared to those high-ranking acolytes who had been honed for a long time, she obviously could not control the power in her body well. Chapter 308. This was actually the tragedy of most Magus families. After becoming a Magus, due to the closure of the life energy system and the huge changes in the body's genes, it became a huge problem to have children like a normal human. Even if there were some who succeeded, the child they gave birth to would most likely be a normal human or even a malformed fetus. However, if the parents were strong enough, or if their bloodline was strong enough, even if it was more difficult to give birth, the child they gave birth to would most likely continue his or her powerful bloodline talent. Most Magus families, especially bloodline Magi families, would usually refuse to marry non-family members in order to maintain the purity and tradition of the family's bloodline. Within the Seaman family, the difference in treatment between the family members who had awakened their bloodline power and those who had not was so huge that it left one speechless. For bloodline descendants like Celia, the family would focus on nurturing them. If they were lucky enough, they would have the chance to become a rank 1 bloodline Magus. However, if they were judged to have insufficient bloodline power to become a bloodline Magus, then their fate was sealed. They could only become the reproduction tool of other high-ranked bloodline Magi within the family. Celia's luck was good. With the protection of grandfather Sark, who was considered strong, she was able to live a carefree and happy childhood in Willock Castle. Thus, when the big tree above their heads suddenly collapsed, their fate became dangerous and unknown. Even though her rationality kept telling her that she had to leave this castle, Celia, who had never traveled alone, could not muster the courage to rush out. After awakening her bloodline power, she had ventured into some primordial forests to train, but that was done under the protection of large groups of mercenaries and acolytes of the family. Furthermore, the battle experience and life skills she gained were still very little. Thus, while her brother, who was a normal human, kept reminding her, Celia was still hesitating. Maybe the family would not be so heartless, maybe things would turn for the better, maybe grandfather Sark was just seriously injured and was hiding outside to recuperate. However, just as the two hid in the house and whispered to each other, a feminine voice suddenly sounded outside the door. Hiding outside? Kaki. Don't even think about it. You've probably forgotten that you have the bloodline of the Seaman family in you. It's too easy to track your whereabouts. The door opened and a male Magus with a gray triangular snake head walked in. It was Alexa, the wizard sent by the family to take care of Grandpa Sark's funeral. The two people in the room looked at each other, their eyes showing fear and fear at the same time. They knew very well that this wizard Alexa had always been at odds with their grandfather. Since the family had sent him here, then the decision made by the family elders was obvious. Celia asked in a trembling voice, "How did the family decide on Grandpa Sark's death?" "Of course," Wizard Aixa sneered, "don't look into it any more. After all, Sark was the one who took the initiative to find trouble with the other party. The other party had already submitted all the evidence to the Scattered Pagoda Forest Association. The old farts in the association kept pressuring the family to hand over the culprit who destroyed the stability and unity. TSK. Sark is already dead. What else can the family hand over? Of course it's you unlucky bastards, scapegoats. But Grandpa Sark is the most famous elite wizard in the family, and the contract he signed with the family also has a clause to protect the future generations. Does the family want to violate the contract?" Celia's voice was getting hoarse by now. The contract that Sark signed did indeed have such a clause, but don't forget, Sark didn't die in the family's mission. He ran out and secretly accepted a mission to kill, and instead lost his own life. Now the family is in a passive position. What did the family elders say? This matter was completely caused by Sark, and the family has no obligation to bear the consequences for him. Therefore, the result of the family and the association's negotiation is that all of Sark's territories and businesses must be handed over to the Sarubo family's boy. As for you descendants with Sark's bloodline must also be handed over. Saying till here, Isaac coldly glanced at the two of them. In order to prevent the family's bloodline from leaking out, the family has specially tasked me to retrieve the giant serpent bloodline of your branch. The faces of the young man and woman in the room instantly turned deathly pale. Any bloodline Magus family, in order to enrich the power of their bloodline, would create a few foreign branches, using this method to absorb powerful magi from the outside to serve the family. Under certain circumstances, these foreign branches would also be bestowed with a portion of the family's bloodline. However, if the foreign members went against the family's interests, their bloodline could be cruelly retrieved. The process of retrieving the bloodline was extremely cruel and terrifying. Under the pressure of the Sarubo family and the Scattered Tower Forest Association, the Hikari family was forced to hand over the members of Sark's branch for the other party to vent their anger. However, the Hikari family did not wish for their bloodline to fall into the hands of outsiders, so they sent Isaac to Willock Castle to preside over the ceremony. Nightfall. Celia, who had awakened her bloodline, was brought to a secret room in the main castle. Her mournful wails continued for the entire night, only dying down when dawn approached. 12 days later, all 37 members of the Sark family were sent to Ferdinand City. The title deeds for Willock Castle, Fandle City, and the surrounding land were also sent to the Sarubo family. According to the agreement, Fandle City belonged to the Sarubo family, while Grimm received Willock Castle and the surrounding land. At the same time, 5 members of the Sark family were sent to Grimm. One of them had an awakened bloodline, and 4 of them were acolytes. As for the other 30, they had already been dealt with by the Sarubo family, including the grandson of Magus Sark. Since he did not have any power in the eyes of outsiders, he was no different from a normal person. He did not even have the chance to be sent to Grimm before he was executed. In the residence on the 7th floor of the Magus Tower, Grimm personally inspected the group of 5 slaves. Originally, when he heard that one of them had awakened his bloodline, Grimm was slightly tempted. However, when he saw the people being escorted into the room, his mood instantly turned sour. The female leader's information clearly stated that she was 15 years old, but looking at her lifeless gray eyes and old and loose facial skin, no matter how you looked at it, she should be an old woman in her 60s or 70s. In her body, Grimm could not sense any bloodline energy, nor any elemental energy. She seemed to be a normal person. No, a person who had aged prematurely, even more pitiful than a normal person. Damn it, the Hikari family was really ruthless. They actually sucked out all the bloodline energy in her body, not leaving a single bit for himself. A Sark family member like this could only be killed. No one wanted to leave behind a descendant of their enemy, only to have them take revenge a few decades later. Without her bloodline energy, she did not even have the qualifications to be a research subject for Grimm. Grimm helplessly shook his head and shifted his gaze. The Sarubo family had already investigated the remaining 4 acolytes and found that they did not have any bloodline relationship with the Sark family. They only relied on the Sark family to obtain knowledge and resources, so there was no need to kill them all. After forcing them to sign a new service contract, Grimm threw them to Alice, who had just returned, and asked her to bring them back to Willock Castle and carefully clean up the property and servants there. Since the bloodline of the Sark descendants had been taken back, Grimm could only grit his teeth and endure. If even the resources and personal collection left behind by the Sark family were taken back, Grimm could only go to the Hikari family and have a good talk. After dealing with the Sark family, the next thing that worried Grimm the most was the female illusionist who had escaped. Grimm had a feeling that she was the key to unraveling the mystery of the assassination. After returning to the Wizard Tower, Grimm repeatedly thought about that night, and he felt that the whole thing was not as simple as it seemed. That bloody butcher, the body refinement wizard, might have something to do with the Black Hand Association, but the Sark family's Sark was definitely not someone the Black Hand Association could invite. Vaguely, Grimm felt that there was a mastermind behind all this, and it was not just him that they were after, but also Alice. This could be seen from the fact that they only sent out the bloody butcher to keep him busy, while the other two main forces went to kill Alice and Cabby. Cabby was able to survive because of his invisibility spell and partial transformation spell, but Alice was only able to survive because of luck. To be honest, even Grimm could not imagine that a quasi-wizard could escape from an elite wizard's innate attack. If Grimm did not give her the Void Stone, he was afraid that what he would see in the end would be a petrified statue of Alice. From all the signs, it seemed that the other party wanted to kill Alice first, and not him. This was very clear. Also, his investigation of the female illusionist did not yield any result. He had searched the entire scattered tower forest, but he had never heard of a person with such a figure and appearance. Grimm could not help but suspect that the appearance she revealed that night might not be her true self. Chapter 309. 13 days later, Alice arrived at Willock Castle in a carriage amidst the rain. When the black carriage passed through the wide crescent-shaped doorway, drove over the road paved with fine gravel, bypassed the huge and exquisite mermaid fountain, and stopped in front of the castle's main 3-story building, many servants, including gardeners, cooks, handymen, maids, guards, and butlers, were bowing and waiting. Their expressions were flattering and awkward, and their eyes were filled with panic that could not be concealed. Those who could stay had signed a contract with the castle, so at this time, they were also counted as part of the castle's wealth. Seeing a few people coming down from the carriage, everyone could not help but let out a sigh of relief. It was Kerr, Warren, and the other 3 sorcerer apprentices. They were also old people who had served the castle for 5 or 6 years. Being able to see them, everyone felt relieved. When Alice appeared in front of everyone in a light yellow dress, they were puzzled at first, but then under the guidance of the 4 sorcerer apprentices, they formally greeted her. "All right, all of you can go." Alice waved her hand impatiently and said, "Help me settle down first. The steward will report to me in a while. The rest of you continue with your work." Everyone hurriedly obeyed. An hour later, Alice, who had a simple bath, met the castle butler in the bedroom on the 2nd floor. The butler was an old man with a pair of gold-rimmed glasses, white hair, and meticulously dressed. He was also the old butler who had served Willock Castle for more than 50 years. Of course, to be able to have the honor of serving a wizard, he also had a noble title. It was actually normal for a wizard to hire a large number of low-level nobles in their private businesses. After all, there were too few people who were literate and knew how to calculate. "Tell me, what kind of business does this Willock Castle have? I want to listen carefully." Alice, who was wrapped in a soft silk robe, reclined in the chair, looking like an old woman. As she had just come out of the bath, her golden hair was still wet, and from time to time, water would drip onto the carpet. She had brought the silk robe herself, and it barely reached her knees. When she curled up in the chair, her robe was pulled inward, revealing her snow-white calves and slender bare feet. Those 10 small and beautiful toes that were like blooming petals were even more eye-catching. Inside the house, other than the old butler who had rushed over to report, there were also the 4 sorcerer apprentices who had just defected. 2 of them were high-level and 2 of them were mid-level. However, they all lowered their heads, not daring to peep at this maverick Alice. Alice tugged at the silk robe that had slid down her shoulders, covering the brightly colored magic tattoo. Every time Alice saw the complicated, exquisite, and 3-dimensional mysterious tattoo that covered her entire upper body, She couldn't help but recall the time when she was lying on the alchemy lab table, and the terrible pain she felt when the scorching rays scratched her skin bit by bit. She already knew that Grimm had a tattoo. She even knew that the magic tattoo on Grimm's body was surprisingly effective. In the past, the old version of the Balrog transformation could double his physical attribute. Although it didn't last long, it was enough to make people envious. Now, with the integration of runes from another world, the new version of the Balrog transformation could even increase his strength by about 3 times. This was a bit too amazing. The new version of the Balrog transformation gave Grimm an extremely powerful Balrog body, and the transplanted Balrog heart could provide an endless supply of fire energy. The combination of the two created a super terrifying Balrog demon. As her master's personal maid, Alice now knew Grimm's true strength like the back of her hand. Therefore, when Grimm called her to the secret room and asked her in a serious and mysterious manner if she was willing to accept such a magic tattoo, Alice's blood all over her body was boiling. The answer was, of course, yes. As a person with extraordinary power, she would not reject any kind of knowledge or technology that could improve her ability, so Alice agreed without hesitation. However, when she laid naked on the alchemy table and accepted the baptism of the magic tattoo, she could not help but regret it. This was too painful. Was this a magic tattoo? No, it was definitely not. What was the difference between this and the magic patterns and runes that alchemists etched on magic tools? The only difference was that one was a cold object that did not know pain, while she was a living person. The scorching ray burned her flesh. It was not deep, not shallow, not big, not small, and the flesh was as thin as a thread. The groove was filled with a special alchemy material in time. The material obviously contained a special substance that could inhibit the regeneration of flesh. This was the only way to prevent the magic tattoo from failing due to her strong physique and premature healing of the wound. Moreover, this huge magic tattoo covered most of her upper body, so it was inevitable that it would pass through some of the more sensitive areas. When the scorching ray wandered around the sensitive areas, Alice had to exert 120% of her strong willpower to prevent her flesh and skin from trembling due to pain or numbness. After all, the process of drawing a magic tattoo was rigorous and precise. Any deviation of the position of the tattoo could cause the magic tattoo to fail. Therefore, Alice had to transform herself into a numb humanoid object when her mind was clear. Only then could she avoid interfering with the drawing of the magic tattoo. Therefore, the 4 hours of drawing the tattoo was simply an endless and terrifying torture. When Grimm whispered in her ear that the magic tattoo had been successfully completed, Alice could not even get up from the alchemy table for a quarter of an hour. In the end, it was Grimm who knew what was going on and brought her back to her residence. After resting for half a day, she finally regained her senses. Grimm specialized in the fire element, so he drew the Balrog transformation for himself. Alice, on the other hand, had awakened the destiny witch bloodline and was good at spatial talent, so Grimm drew the tattoo for her, and this was obviously tailor-made for her. Apart from the castle itself, the estate of Willock Castle also includes a small manor that is responsible for providing daily food and necessities to the castle. There are XXX slaves, XXX buildings, XXX vassal land in Fandle City. There is also a secret hut, 2 blacksmiths, 2 bread shops inside the castle. There are XXX buildings, XXX rooms, XXX servants, XXX barrels of wine in the wine cellar, and the gold coins in hand. Listening to the noble steward patiently listing out all the properties of the castle, Alice finally waved her hand impatiently and interrupted him. "You can just write down all these worldly wealth and give me a copy. What I want to know the most is, what kind of private treasury or collection did the dead Magus Sark have?" A smile appeared on Alice's delicate doll-like face. "Don't tell me you've already dealt with these things?" The faces of the 4 defecting acolytes were filled with fear, and the noble steward lowered his head even more. I wouldn't dare, Lady Alice. The Magus Sark built his own collection room, laboratory, and study on the third floor of the castle. Outsiders are forbidden from entering, even Miss Celia was forbidden from entering without being summoned. The noble steward smiled awkwardly. So we don't know what's inside. Oh, there's such a thing? Alice's eyes immediately lit up. To be honest, as an acolyte, who wouldn't be curious about a magic laboratory built by an old magus? Being able to go there and search for treasures must be something very interesting. Alice immediately rushed back behind the screen like a whirlwind. When she appeared in front of everyone again, she was wearing a fitted short gray robe, a short and exquisite magic wand, a golden birdcage, an intelligent headband, and a row of glass test tubes lined up neatly around her waist. Alice's white and delicate fingers were almost completely covered with mysterious glowing magic rings. Even the sharp moccasins on Alice's feet were faintly flashing with the glow of magic. All right, I'm ready," Alice shouted excitedly. "Let's go check out the Magus Sark's laboratory right now." "Us?" The 4 acolytes raised their heads at the same time, a bad omen appearing in their hearts. "Of course it's us." Alice clenched her fist tightly and became impatient. "You're all here to protect me, so of course you'll have to go in with me." The faces of the 4 acolytes turned pale in an instant. Magus Sark's laboratory was built on the 3rd floor of the castle's main building. Following the wooden spiral staircase, Alice and the 4 acolytes successfully stepped into this unfamiliar territory. In front of them was a quiet, deep, and dim corridor. On both sides of the corridor, there was a small candlestick placed at a certain distance. Perhaps it sensed the presence of life. With a light click, the candle closest to them silently lit up. Then, one by one, the candlestick lit up and slowly extended into the depths of the corridor. The candlelight was very dim and could only illuminate half a meter of the area around the candlestick. The dim candlelight flickered, adding a strange and mysterious feeling to the dark and deep corridor. Everyone couldn't help but swallow their saliva. Secret magic rooms, witchcraft traps, wizard beast guards, mysterious monsters, terrifying witchcraft radiation. Once they thought of these creepy things, they couldn't help but feel their stomachs cramp. If it weren't for Alice watching them from behind, the 4 sorcerer apprentices would have fled in disarray and disappeared without a trace. Checking out the laboratory of an old magus? This wasn't any safer than checking out some ancient ruins. As an elite wizard, no one would believe that Wizard Sack didn't set up any alarm system in his wizard lab to fool a child. This detestable Alice. She was so arrogant before they set off, but as soon as they set foot on the 3rd floor, she naturally hid behind the 4 sorcerer apprentices. She even acted as if she was in the right, as if this was how it should be. "Will, you go in front." Alice waved her little fist and ordered. The guy called Will was only an intermediate acolyte. He was undoubtedly the weakest out of the 4. Now that he was called out by Alice, he turned around to look at the evasive eyes of his 3 companions. He knew this was unavoidable, and no one would plead for him. Chapter 310. After stepping into the corridor, everything in front of them quickly turned dark. The originally dark walls of the corridor began to fade at a speed visible to the naked eye. The surface of the wall continuously tilted and peeled off, and then it quickly turned yellow and withered in the air. After the surface peeled off, the rusty metal wall underneath was revealed. A deep rumbling sound that could shake one's soul began to reverberate in their ears. "It seems to be an illusion," Kerr, who was following behind, said softly. "Who has an ingredient to restrain illusions?" Will, who was walking in front, asked with a trembling voice. Senior Acolyte Warren searched his waist pouch for a while, and took out a black clay pot. He said softly, "I have some hallucinogenic grass. Who needs it?" Me. The other 3 were overjoyed and couldn't help but ask for it. Hallucinogenic grass was a type of herb with serrated leaf. It was also one of the basic ingredients for making hallucinogenic potions. If the hallucinogenic grass was ground into a paste and smeared on the tip of the nose, it could refresh one's mind and increase one's resistance to hallucinations. After the four were done, they were about to turn around and ask Alice if she needed it. However, they found that she was holding a sparkling magic gem in her hand, constantly observing the changes in the surroundings. This gem was colorless and transparent in the shape of a diamond. When she held it in her hand, it emitted a gentle light that gave people a sense of tranquility. The gem of true vision. The acolytes' facial muscles twitched, and they were momentarily speechless. This kind of magic gem that could see through invisibility and illusions was worth at least 400 magic crystals in the market. With their financial resources, they couldn't afford it at all. On the other hand, as an acolyte, although he was a more respectable quasi-sorcerer, he could easily take out one. The difference between acolytes was too big. Alice waved the gem of true vision and moved closer to the wall. The dilapidated and withered scene she saw just now disappeared in an instant. The wall returned to its dark brown wood texture. Everything was the same as before. It really was an illusion. After seeing this, the acolytes were finally relieved. Will grimaced and walked in front step by step. Based on the length of one side of the castle, this corridor was at most less than 100 meters long. With their eyesight, no matter how dim the lights were, they should be able to see the end of the corridor with a glance. But strangely, their line of sight could only extend 7 to 8 meters away. The scene in the distance seemed to be engulfed by a ball of darkness, completely unable to be seen. It seemed to be some kind of illusion effect. Will slowly moved forward, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings and his feet. Any slight change or abnormality would make him stop, and he would only move forward again after he was sure that there was no danger. The fog-like darkness faded away bit by bit. The flickering candlelight on both sides of the wall reflected a dim yellow halo. The shadows cast on the wall were sometimes long and sometimes short, sometimes left and sometimes right, like demons baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. The wooden planks under his feet were obviously old, and when he stepped on them, it made a creaking sound that made his teeth ache. On the left wall in front of them hung a half-meter square wooden frame. It was hidden in the shadows of the candlelight and could not be seen. Now that he was close enough, Weir could see the content clearly. It was a rural landscape painting, with mountains in the distance and water nearby. In the middle of the painting was a slightly raised hill, and a blurry figure of unknown gender was looking at them from the top of the hill. The painting technique could be considered excellent, but it was unknown what the painter was thinking. The entire painting was actually painted in black and white, forcefully turning the beautiful rural scenery into a sinister, ghostly painting. Weir shook his head and focused on the wooden planks under his feet. As he moved forward, the strange creaking sound kept following him, and he could not focus on the movement around him. When he stopped and wanted to listen to the movements around him, the creaking sound of wooden boards came from behind him. "You guys are quiet." Weir could not help but scold them, but what he saw shocked him. His companions were indeed following behind him, but their skin was pale, their faces were twisted, and tears of blood were flowing down from their eyes. "What happened to you guys?" Weir asked with a trembling voice. A ferocious and terrifying smile appeared on his companions' faces. They stretched out their deathly pale claws that were as sharp as those of drowned corpses, and surrounded him while making strange noises. Weir was so scared that he took a few steps back. Finally, he could not bear the fear in his heart and turned around to run. Crossing the stream, running across the meadow, Weir ran until he was out of breath. After climbing up a small hill, he panted and stopped. Did he finally get rid of those scary monsters? With a trace of fear, Weir turned around and suddenly realized that the environment around him was strange. This place did not seem to be the dark and gloomy third-floor corridor of the castle, but looking at the gloomy mountain behind him, looking at the gray meadow in front of him, looking at the black river. In the distance, there was a wooden frame floating in midair. It seemed to be a window. Through it, he could vaguely see a pale figure leading Kerr, Warren and the others through a dark and scary corridor. Judging from his position and angle, Weir was shocked to find that he seemed to be in the painting that he had just seen, and his original position had been replaced by the figure in the painting. Damn it, is this an illusion or reality? For a moment, Weir could not tell if he was being attacked by an illusion or if he was really being led into the painting. Thus, he frantically ran towards the wooden frame window while shouting and waving his hand. But strangely, no matter how he shouted and ran, the wooden frame window was always so far away from him, as if he could never reach it in the gloomy corridor. Kerr could not help but frown and said, "Weir, can you walk faster? If you keep walking like this, how long will it take for us to check the entire floor?" Weir vaguely responded and finally quickened his pace. The corridor was not long and soon, they arrived in front of a wooden door. They got closer to study it and did not feel any traces of witchcraft on the wooden door. There should not be any witchcraft traps or anything like that. Under everyone's signal, Weir gathered his courage and gently pushed the wooden door open. With a soft creak, the wooden door opened. Inside was a beautifully decorated small library. The space was not big, but the wooden shelves against the wall were densely packed with books and scrolls. Many of the books even flashed with a faint fluorescent light, and one could tell at a glance that they were not ordinary items. Books, so many books, the acolytes, who had already made collecting knowledge an instinct, wanted to push the others aside and barge into the room to find some books that interested them. But at this moment, Alice's childish cough came from behind them. The acolytes froze and hurriedly moved to the side, bowing and saying, "Lady Alice, please go first." Alice took a step forward and sneered, "Before we divide the spoils, take a good look first." As she raised her delicate little hand, the gem of truth in her palm shot a gentle white light into the library, and the body of the intermediate acolyte, Weir, who was leaning against the door. The scene that had been normal a second ago took a turn for the worse in the next second. What greeted everyone's eyes was an extremely terrifying scene. The wooden door from before had disappeared, and in front of everyone was a strange black slit in the wall. At the end of the slit was a portrait hanging on the wall. The figures in the portrait swayed, and a few strange black shadows were sneakily looking in their direction. Weir, who had been standing by the side of the door, had turned pale under the white light. His skin seemed to have become translucent, giving off a ghostly and terrifying feeling. "I've already opened the door, come in quickly." Weir turned around and urged everyone with a smile. His face was so pale that it looked as if he had smeared a thick layer of stone powder on it, and 2 streaks of crimson blood could be seen clearly. As he laughed sinisterly, the muscles on his face twisted malevolently, making him look like a demon from another world. Damn it, since when did Weir get swapped? In the next second, without any explanation, 3 different colored spells landed on Weir. Shadow Arrow, Frost Dagger, Lightning Claw. The strength of the energy was between 12 to 15 degrees. Although the strength wasn't high, the attack was fast. Although the fake Weir felt that something was wrong, it was too late to dodge. The 3 acolytes' quick-cast spells hit his body. The white bone shield around Weir's body was penetrated by the spells, as if it didn't exist. The fake Weir screamed as he was hit by the 3 spells. His voice was cold and hoarse, not like a human's voice at all. As for the pieces of his body that were scattered in all directions, not a trace of blood or flesh could be seen. Instead, they slowly melted into the air like energy matter. Knowing that he had been exposed, the fake Weir's appearance suddenly changed. His entire body instantly turned into a transparent energy matter, quietly merging into the wall beside him. The 3 acolytes' second round of attacks all missed. They only made a big hole in the wooden wall, revealing a completely dark space inside. A gust of cold air blew out from inside, and the people in front of it couldn't help but shiver. "Damn it, it's a spirit body!" Senior Acolyte Warren cursed angrily. "Our attacks just now weren't enough. We didn't really hurt it. Later, we'll all have to." Before he finished speaking, the nearby wall flashed with fluorescent light. A transparent human figure drilled out from inside, its sharp claws ruthlessly slashing across Warren's left arm. "Ah!" Warren screamed in pain. 2 witchcraft shot out, but it was a pity that it only hit the old wall, causing wood chips to fly everywhere. The spirit body had long since hidden somewhere. Warren endured the pain and tore off his torn sleeve. On the side of his left arm, he saw several terrifying claw marks that were so deep that the bone could be seen. The wound had already turned bluish-black. A layer of crystal-clear frost completely froze the flesh around the wound, and it continued to spread up and down. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.